All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I am joined by Father Moses McPherson. How you doing today, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing great. Hey, I'm really excited for today's conversation. I was able to catch your convo with Buck Johnson, and man, was that good.
Oh, yeah, man. Thank you. Glory to God. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And welcome to the patristic faith team. Father Deacon was talking to privately about being added to the apologetic crew there. And so really appreciate you taking the time to come on today. And I think we'll be hitting on a wide range of topics, but I guess to maybe get started, for those who aren't familiar with who you are, do you mind maybe just giving a brief introduction, and then we can dive into some of the topics at hand?
Yeah. I've been, as I said in Buck Johnson, I kind of lived obviously a very unchristian life up until basically 18-ish. Became a Protestant Christian at the time. Met my wife and got married about 2 years later. So I was married when I was 20 and my wife was just 21. And we went away to college where we were married a year and then went away to college and took a class on Eastern Orthodoxy. And it corresponded to everything that was going on in my life on a really deep level. It was more impactful in terms of the transformation that I was needing than it was, quote unquote, like historical Christianity or something. Mm-hmm. And we ended up becoming Orthodox. We were 25-ish. I'm 42 now. So went to seminary right around 29, 30-ish. So we were Orthodox about 3 years and went to seminary for 3 years at St. Tikhon's and then was ordained and been a priest for the last 10 plus years. So
wow.
Yeah.
And you got 5 boys, right?
5 boys, man.
Yeah.
5 boys.
Yeah, I caught that piece of information, which is going to play in our conversation today because talking about masculinity, I think that's going to be something you're going to be quite familiar with. One being a married man with children, but also then trying to raise boys that are going to become strong Christian men in the kind of 21st century that we see today. That's not easy. So before we get into, because I titled the stream "Finding the Royal Path," And the reason why I did that was after hearing your testimony over on Buck Johnson. And so I would really love to kind of open up by talking about your earlier childhood experience and sort of what you saw, things that you did, and how this sort of led into the journey where eventually you go to the college, take the courses, and why orthodoxy had the medicine that you were looking for.
Yeah, yeah. As I've spoken about in the past, I just lived a very hedonistic life. I mean, that's really the easiest way to put it. I was essentially a pagan, involved in kind of new age spiritualism, you could say, moral ambiguity, moral relativism, and living a life that was reflective of that, where the primary focus of my life was to get high and to take drugs and to live immorally. I mean, that was really the whole driving force of my life, was just hedonism. And when I converted into Protestantism, it didn't heal all the damage that I had done. And I think we could talk about this also later on, which was Protestantism involves a lot of how can you say it? I don't want to say moralism, but kind of behaviorism. So like, let's say you have a problem with something. Let's say you have a problem with lust. Well, the answer to that is not to actually like destroy the passion of lust inside of you and to actually hit it at the ground level. The goal is to kind of like not engage in just the behaviors.
Right.
So you end up kind of in a very surface level battling these sins or passions or whatever it is, or pride, like you have pride and you're trying to get rid of your pride, but you're not able to kind of get down into the core of it, of what's happening inside the heart. And so since the heart is still captive to the passions and still decaying, it still is giving birth to death over and over and over again. And so, for me, a huge part of my problem was I was very depressed. I really struggled with a lot of depression. I had at that point obviously stopped doing drugs, but I was still drinking very heavily and out of control. And I had a lot of dark suicidal ideations in my mind, and was just everything was turmoil. Like my soul was in turmoil. So even though I was quote unquote a Christian, even though I had found Christ, I hadn't found the healing that I was looking for. I was still mentally and emotionally just an absolute train wreck. You know what I mean? And so maybe on the outside, there was, I was still going to college. I was doing a double major. I was still getting, decent grades. I was getting good grades in philosophy and religion and whatever else, and all these different things. And I'm married, and obviously, like, I'm faithful to my wife, and so whatever else. But on the inside, like, I emotionally was not there. I just had a kind of a lingering darkness that really overshadowed my soul, really overshadowed my mind. And I couldn't get out from underneath it. So
when did your drug use begin, and what was some of the catalysts that led you into smoking weed and then eventually psychedelics?
Yeah, so when I was, my family life was rough. It was rough. There was a lot of turmoil. There was a lot of dysfunction. There was a lot of, obviously, my parents had a lot of issues. So two things happened. Number one was I got put on ADHD medication when I was pretty young, 9 or 10-ish. And I do think the ADHD medication gave me a lot of anxiety. I didn't realize it at the time because, you're a kid. You're 11 years old. How do you articulate anxiety?
Right.
Like your parents are fighting all the time. Your dad has a problem with anger. There's violence in your family. You don't feel good about life. You don't feel peaceful. You definitely don't feel kind of happy and go lucky. You're in a weird funk as a little kid trying to survive and make it through it. And so when I was 14-ish is when I first got introduced to smoking weed, and as soon as I started smoking weed, it was like it was like, you know, it was like I had found the substitute of the Holy Spirit. I mean,
Right.
that's really what it was.
Right.
It was like, oh, when you smoke, when I get high, it's like I don't feel anxiety, I don't feel depressed, I don't care if my parents are screaming at each other. Like, I don't care about anything. Like,
Right.
I'm exempt from all of these negative feelings. And so, yeah, when I was 14, I started smoking, and I think within 6 months, I was basically smoking like every day, pretty much.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I said it on Bucks. I mean, I think from basically 15 to 17 in a 2-year period, I think I could count like there were less than 5 days that I was sober in like 2 years.
Right.
And it probably was like literally like 2 or 3 days that I had like didn't consume something. So
Right.
yeah, I was pretty much right off to the right. And I had a buddy of mine who had an older brother, so it was like we're smoking weed, and then the older brother's like, you know, like it was an older brother's friend was like, oh, you guys want to try some coke, you know? And then it was like, yeah, sure. It's like, why not, you know? And so
Right.
it just everything, you know, you're around all those people. And then growing up in Southern California in the 90s, this is all mid 90s. I graduated high school in 99, so this is all like 94, 95. Like, dude, drugs were they just were everywhere. You know, like it wasn't hard to get drugs, it wasn't hard to get weed. Everything was like available, super available, and psychedelics were hugely available. And you know, I mentioned this on Buck's podcast, so I don't mean to reiterate it, but for those who didn't see, like one of the things that happened was there was a huge basically like outpouring of acid, LSD in the 90s. It was all over the place, and you could get a hit of acid for $5 or less. You know what I mean? $5 was like normal, but you could get blotter, you could get liquid acid. I mean, you could get gel tabs. I mean, it was just there was so much acid and so much drugs that like the main thing is you know, like they say, where there's a will, there's an A. So when you're committed to the cause and you're down and you're trying to get high, like you figure out every day is a 24-hour marathon of getting high, right?
Right.
So like, if that's what you're doing, if your sole purpose in life is to get loaded and you have no job and no money, pretty much, you will find a way. So like you'll be stealing, you'll be doing whatever, like all kinds of stuff just to get loaded. So that was it, man. That was my that was my
well, and that corresponds with my own experience too. Is once I smoked a little bit during high school, but the senior year moving into college, especially during my undergraduate, it went from something you do once in a while to then cruising with your friends and rolling joints and blunts to then all of a sudden it's something you do every single day. And it becomes almost a fixture in your personality. If somebody says, hey, man, you know, you smoke a lot. Oh, well, it's beneficial. It helps me be more creative. It helps me focus. It helps, you know, alleviates my anxiety and all this stuff. And for me, this eventually led into not so much the consumption of drugs for just hedonistic purposes, at least I mean, it was, but that's not what I told myself. It led to eventually during my undergraduate getting exposed to the ideas of Terence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, Alan Watts, and then contemporary people promoting the use of psychedelics as, hey, this is the way in which you sort of get to the leading edge of whatever religion is, whatever these organized religions. And at this time, I kind of lost my Christian faith. I took a class on the Bible during my undergrad and learned about all these academic theories, a multiple authorship theory of the Gospels, and how Gilgamesh is similar to Noah. And it totally just blew away this naive conservative Methodist worldview that I grew up in. And then I'm getting exposed to East Asian stuff, really fascinated with, I was studying biology and then religious studies. And so decided to go to China, and it was like, oh, well, East Asian mysticism, Eastern mysticism with psychedelics. And I really felt like, oh, this is what all this stuff is about. And so for me, this led into a decade of my life, basically from, 21 to 30 when I gave this stuff up, thinking that, oh, well, if I want to access the spiritual realm, I need to do it by myself in nature with mushrooms or LSD, or, hey, maybe I'm going to blast off with some DMT and go into these altered states. But as you highlighted, and I want to hear your story, is eventually this stuff moves from fun, okay, maybe I'm seeing benefits or insights, to now you're starting to see demonic activity, and how the psychedelics, as I've talked about before, it opens you up to the noetic realm. And I think you might agree with this. Can you speak a little bit to your experience getting into the psychedelics and how it went from something, oh, this is fun, this is insightful, this is spiritual, this is beneficial, to, whoa, there's something else going on here. I'm seeing how it is affecting people I know, and there's some, is evil actually real? Because that was what the catalyst for me to run to Christ was, oh my God, evil is absolutely real. And if there's evil, then I need to find what the opposite of that is.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good, it's funny. I was gonna say, like, one thing that you hit on that reminded me was, like, even after I became Protestant, there was a period from 18 to probably 21 where I didn't smoke pot, whatever. I drank still, whatever, but I didn't smoke pot. I went away to college, went to a Christian college, and then, like, one of the guys I was hanging out with, of course, another philosophy major, he's smoking weed. And I'm like, I don't know, we shouldn't be doing that. He's like, no, it's no big deal. As a Christian, you can smoke a little bit. So I'm like, oh, I'll smoke a little bit, blah, 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 blah. And we'll hang out, sort of like smoking it, like, I don't know, on the weekend or whatever. And then, like, a week later, and then we're smoking. I'm like, hey, where's that? You got any more weed? It's Friday night. And then, like, within maybe another week, I'm like in my shower in the morning, like, smoking weed, and it was literally like, I just realized, like, and it was like 2 or 3 weeks, I was, like, pretty much smoking every day. And I realized, I'm like, I have no kind of, like, moderation when it comes to getting high. Like, it just like you said, it has, I mean, it's one of the reasons, like, people ask me about weed. They're like, well, what do you think about weed? I always jokingly say, like, oh, I love smoking weed. Like, I love getting high. They're like, then they're all blown back. I go, I do. But I go, the problem is I just have to, I started end up having to smoke it every day.
Right.
And then that's where it clicks for people, because I don't meet anybody, right? There's nobody who just smokes weed once every 6 months.
Right.
It has such a very, very powerful psychological component to it, that it's a replacement for the Holy Spirit. So I'm like, well, help me understand smoking weed. It's like, so when you get anxiety, they're like, well, when I've worked all day and then I've got my mind is racing, and then, I got this anxiety and work problems and da 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 da. So then it's like, maybe I'm taking a couple gummy bears at night so I can sleep and blah blah blah. Like, do you really think that's wrong, Father? And I'm always like, so you're utilizing weed to calm your anxiety and still your thoughts? And they're like,
Right.
yeah. I'm like, so basically what you should be doing with prayer and the Holy Spirit. They're like, you know what I mean? Like, that's like,
Right.
always like, right. That's what it is. I mean,
Right.
that's it. They used to have this, it's funny because people don't know it now, but, like, you'll see the signs that say wine and spirits. The reason they used to call hard alcohol spirits was that it was referenced as being an replacement for the Holy Spirit. And
Oh,
that's how you have to understand, understanding drugs is understanding them on that noetic level, that it is actually, it's not your mind, it's your heart, it's your nous,
yes.
it's your whole being. And the thing is with weed is that, like, weed's a perfect example. It's such an easy one to talk about, which is, it never brings clarity. It always brings a haze.
Yes.
It always brings a darkening. So you
Yep.
enter into, like, a darkening that quiets your mind and alleviates your anxiety. And then you start just doing it all the time.
Yep.
And then slowly you start to notice, what? Now my anxiety is starting to ramp up.
Right.
So I've got to smoke more to combat that additional anxiety, right? Like, they've done that. They've shown all this, like, through medical trials and whatnot. Like, there is paranoia, there's anxiety, there's all these things that go along with it. It's
Right.
not just nothing. But anyway, so you were asking, anyways, that's a little bit of a
Yeah.
tangent, but
No, that was great. And how,
yeah,
and then, so I was curious because for me, this naturally led, and something you mentioned before is that the psychedelics for you weren't necessarily just a hedonistic thing that you do at parties, although I'm sure there's multiple instances in which you were probably loaded on something at parties and stuff. But for me too, it was like I came to this belief due to the kind of circles I was running in, that the psychedelics, this was the basis of what religions were actually talking about and accessing these spiritual realms. And so I was deeply involved in spirituality, as I would describe it. But it was engaging in this stuff and then eventually seeing how this was leading people, especially around me. And glory to God that I didn't have the negative consequences that I saw other people around me, that their lives started to take a torpedo downwards due to this obsession with the use of psychedelics for these beneficial purposes of spirituality and personal enlightenment and all this stuff. And I know you have some really amazing stories about how your own friends began to see the demonic behind, this sort of facade, this face that the psychedelics offer.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we started taking, again, everybody's a little different, but the guys that I hung out with at the time were more philosophically minded people. And I talked, and so one of the guys that I talked about, this guy, Eric, his parents were involved with a new age guru. And because of that, they had books from him that he recommended, which were these like new age guru books.
Mm-hmm.
And so these new age guru books would be given to us and passed around and whatnot. And Buddhist philosophy books, koans, these things were part of our thought process at the time, being young. But it was, and kind of in the absence of religion, you have one friend whose parents are into new age and they start giving you guys books, or they're talking to them about the new age. And now your friend is, telling you guys about hey, all these religions are connected. They're using that language and you're like a sponge. So you're like, that's so true. Aren't all the religions connected? And they're all one. They're all trying to get to God. None of us can really get to God. So all of them are just trying to get us there as best they can,
That perennial worldview.
Yeah. And again, this was 90s. Like, this was a big, like, new age was really big back then. And then on top of it, like having friends that were into the Wiccan, having friends that were into tarot. So when we started taking hallucinogenics, it was a lot was with my friend Clay and my friend Eric and another guy named Cayman, but we were taking these drugs specifically, much like you said, to go out into nature. We felt like that there was a component to it that was, how can I put it? Mystical. It was supposed to be mystical.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you talk, and so I do think that there is an aspect of psychedelics, like you and I were talking about before the stream, where they grant you kind of early access to your nous, right? Yep. So the Holy Fathers say that God has kind of darkened the nous of man, or at least kind of veiled the spiritual realm, so that we're not able to see angels, we're not able to see demons, we don't have an interaction with the spiritual realm as directly as our forefather Adam did, right? Adam had basically direct access into the spiritual realm, walking with God in the garden and whatnot, speaking with him as a man speaks to another man. And of course, we see in the lives of the saints where this kind of noetic veil is lifted, and the saints are granted access more deeply into the spiritual realm. I do believe that when you go into psychedelics with that intention and desire, it's the devil is like a dog and he smells that.
Yep.
And he comes, and what does St. Paul says? He's like, the devil appears as an angel of light. Right. And so when you're putting out those intentions, reading these books, meditating on all these things, it's like, dude, the demons are all about this. This is exactly what they want you to do. You're in their playground.
Right.
So you're lowering all of your inhibitions. You're granting them basically direct access to your mind and potentially to your soul. And you're opening yourself up to these, to this influence. And so, yeah, I mean, we would get into, heavy conversations about things when we were, on psychedelics and thinking about things and talking about the world and talking about the way things were. And then, of course, like we had obviously very wild kind of mystical experiences that at times were obviously confirming what we were experiencing.
Right.
So, I mean, mind reading each other, understand, like having mental connections, understanding that there was a mental connection between us. I've told the story of my friend Clay when he was very high on mushrooms one time, and like the phone rang, and he told everybody like, "This is who's calling," and then a car pulled up outside, and he said, "So and so is here," and he was telling people stuff, not that the demons couldn't know, but that a person couldn't know, and so people
Right.
around him were like starting to freak out, right? Because now he's starting to kind of tell the future. But even if we look back at the book of Acts, there's the young woman in the book of Acts.
Yep.
She's telling the future. She has a spirit of divination.
Yep.
So these are real powers that exist. They seem to be fairly rare.
Yeah.
But they do happen. They do manifest themselves, and you can be granted access to them. And so, yeah, I mean, I saw that a lot with people as they went into it. Now, when you get into what can we say? The kind of darkening and the kind of immorality. I'll give you like a perfect example, right?
Uh-huh.
I had a guy at work, or a guy from school, a guy from school that I knew, who said, "Hey, I'm looking for," I think he was looking for an 8-ball or 2 8-balls of meth or something.
Uh-huh.
And so I hit up a friend of mine, say, "Hey, man, can you get us X, Y, and Z?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's $200. Meet me at this place, whatever. I got to connect. We'll meet there, and then we'll go and sell it to this other guy." So we go there, and he's like, "Come back in 5 minutes, blah, 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 blah." We come back. He's got a whole baggie full of this powder and everything else. And I'm like, "Hey, let me try it." And he's like, they're like, "Dude, you don't want to try this. It's like way too strong, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, all right, it was a little weird, but I'm like, "Eh." They're like, "Trust me, dude, you're going to get all cranked out on it." So we go and we sell it to my buddy, my other friend. I hop out. He gives me the 200 and I get the bag. Now, these guys have told me, "Hey, we'll sell it to them for 200, but we will give you 100." Basically, they're like, "We'll sell it to you for 100," which is like, doesn't happen, right? You don't like double your money in drugs like that. Like, not 100.
Right. Something's up.
So everything is off, right? Like, these guys, we're going to meet. They all of a sudden have it. They didn't have it 5 minutes before. And then they're going to double the price and all this. So like everything inside me knows that we're doing something wrong. But what am I doing? I'm lying to myself, right?
Right.
So of course we sell it to them, take the 200. I give 100 to these other guys, and then me and my buddy split the other 100 because he's driving me around, whatever. And so as soon as we leave, they're basically like, "Yeah, we just sold them $200 worth of Altoids, like crushed up Altoids that we had like we had stolen." We had like, they literally went to the store, jacked some Altoids. That's why they're like, "Give us 5 more minutes." So we had to drive around and come back and meet them so they could crush up all the Altoids. So they didn't want to snort in the Altoids. So anyways, so now we've got this money. So what do? I don't go back and give it to my buddy and say, "Hey, dude, we ripped you off. I'm really sorry." I'm like, "Well, what's done is done." It's like, let's go get some mushrooms. So we went and got mushrooms, got cigarettes and a gram of weed. But that was the thing, was like, everything that we did was always immoral. But every step along the way, if you were ripping friends off, or like you'd go over to someone's house and see something and be like, "I could kind of use that." You would like, I've stolen from people's houses. Like, it's like, I feel terrible admitting that. Like, it's awful, like, I mean, I feel so ashamed admitting to that. But like, you'd be over at somebody's house and be like, "Oh, I want those CDs that they have." And so you just gank them. That's what I mean. It was always like, all your behavior was like continually justified. If you wanted to treat somebody bad, or you wanted to treat, whatever, like talk to somebody, however, or be rude, or do what, you were always justifying everything that you were doing, so that everything was about you and for you. And the thing that I noticed is like, it's always incremental. And the thing that I could see after several years of this was like, nobody could have a healthy relationship with a girl. It's like impossible. Why? Because like everybody was immoral. Like the chicks were immoral, the dudes were immoral, like everybody's immoral. Nobody has character.
Right.
and everybody's burning each other. Like,
Yep.
you know, I was dating this girl that I was really serious with, and like it all went south, and she cheated on me and all this other stuff. And again, that was one of those times where I was like, I have no foundation for anything moral in my life. Everything that I do, I justify, and everybody around me is like doing the same thing, you know?
Right.
So I don't know what that was. There was like some
Yeah, I'd never seen that
dude,
before.
I never seen that either.
What the
That's
heck?
wild, man.
Yeah, and same with me. And you know, I got into all this stuff, and this is going to connect back with masculinity and hyperdoxy. So everybody wondering like, where are we going with this? I promise you, it's all going to come full circle. But for me, one of the things that I noticed is throughout my 20s, I thought I was on this leading edge and promoting psychedelics. And I'm from the Midwest. I live in Indiana. And at the time, then I did my master's over in Illinois. And so I'm considered sort of I guess for lack of a better term, progressive, sort of left of
Mhm.
center. You know, I'm into drugs. I'm talking about perennialism. I'm doing academic stuff. And then I get to California, Berkeley, California. So the the pinnacle of the counterculture and drug culture.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I've arrived, right? I'm getting a PhD. I'm talking about psychedelics. I'm taking psychedelics. I got a successful YouTube channel promoting psychedelics. And then one time I remember taking acid, walking around Berkeley and seeing things that I wasn't privy to before. And so seeing evil, seeing people's faces morph, seeing the homelessness, seeing the drug addiction, seeing the needles on the, and I'm thinking, man, what is going on? I thought I was so excited to be there. I was on a high for like 6 months, you know, not literally high, but just being there in Berkeley in California, I feel like I made it. And this began to shift when I saw academics, then this was more sober, but promoting minor attracted persons. And I'm thinking, this is clearly immoral. What is going on? And I started to realize all the things that I was promoting. Now I was surrounded by general conservative culture growing up in the Midwest. Now I'm in the most progressive culture. And I'm seeing what are actually the consequences of all these things that I believed in, that I've been promoting, and the use of all these substances. And that began to wake me up to the idea that, oh, maybe all this stuff is leading people in the wrong direction. And this eventually led me into a direction where I started to build a relationship with Christ and orthodoxy. But I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to the transition then from this sort of experiences you're having as a young man into then where you kind of met Christ and formed a relationship, and then how that leads into discovering orthodoxy.
Yeah, so like there's a couple things. I mean, like number one is I saw the same thing, which was in liberalism. I mean, there's no. I mean, I was clearly whatever you want to say. I mean, I was a kid, so I wasn't voting, but I was clearly a kind of Democrat kind of child, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I wouldn't consider myself a Republican, so I'm not saying it's a political thing, but I was very liberal. I remember, you know, I had friends who were gay, which even in the 90s was still like kind of taboo. I had a lot of friends who were gay. I had, you know, people that I knew, girls I knew that were, you know, bi and all this sort of stuff and blah, 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 blah. But one of the things that you often see with that liberal mindset is there's such an egotism of like, we're the good ones.
Yeah.
And then when you actually look at it, like you have friends and their parents are liberal, you realize they're all divorced.
Yeah, that's true.
Like they're all divorced.
Right.
And then you know, my mom worked at a place that was a graduate school for people doing psychology. And you get to know these people a bit, nice people, friendly, nice, good social skills, right? As like as liberal as they can be. And it's like, what's the consistent thing? It's like everyone's kids are on drugs.
Yep.
You know, the kids are on drugs, the people are divorced, like they're, you know, they're like counselors, like therapists and stuff, and their lives are like completely different in their private life. They're like very esteemed. This person has a PhD or this person has a master's or whatever, and they're so good and they know so much about psychology. And then you like meet their family and you're like, woo, like
Yeah.
this is like these two things are not adding up, you know?
Right.
And that was one of the things that became very, I don't know, like I couldn't unsee it. Everybody that I knew that was touting this kind of superior, quote unquote, morality of being liberal and accepting was really just hyper selfish and self-centered.
Yep.
And again, you know, when you see like in LA or you see in California, you know, the problem with homelessness or this, you realize we don't care about any of these people. Like it's all just platitudes and nonsense, and it's all virtue signaling. It's none of
Right.
it is real. There's no actual definable work that is actually being done to help cure the underlying causes of this, because the underlying causes are spiritual.
Right.
So they don't even have a way of even addressing it. So the only way to address it, you know, it's like you get somebody, okay, here's a perfect example, right? You get a girl who's been abused sexually as a child.
Yep.
She's a wreck. She's a very, very damaged person. And, you know, I talked about this before. I knew a lot of girls that were like this. It was very heartbreaking for me. And nobody really loved them in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them didn't have father figures, or their parents were divorced, or their dads weren't around, right? Like,
Right.
it's all just kind of like prototypical stuff, you know?
Right.
Somewhere along the way, they get introduced to the Wiccan stuff, or they get introduced to tarot, or they get introduced to exploring sexually with other girls,
Yep.
and all these different things, right? So you have somebody who now is like basically incapable of creating and sustaining a faithful long-term relationship with anybody, because they are so deeply broken and damaged. And so what you do is you don't, you know, what the kind of mindset is like, well, we just accept them for who they are. And you're like, but that doesn't heal them.
Right.
It doesn't do anything. You're like, I'm like, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's like somebody the other day, we were talking about like the rates of domestic violence. The most domestic violence occurs in same-sex female relationships.
I've seen that stat too.
They do. They have the highest rate of domestic violence of any relationship. Okay. It's crazy. So what do? You go, well, we accept it because that's love, or we accept it because it's this or that. But there's no standard of what's healthy or normal. And so for me, it was like, dude, it doesn't take a genius to see these women desperately want love and affection and affirmation, and they don't know how to get it. And every guy that's around them is out for one thing with them, and they only know how to offer them one thing.
Right.
Like men are just there to pimp them for their sexuality, and they're willing to exploit their sexuality to try to get some affection that
Right.
they can't get otherwise. And it's just brutal.
Right.
The whole thing is so brutal, and there's no healing. There's
Right.
no standard. There's no remedy. There's no nothing. Just the whole thing is just such a, I mean, it just fires me up, because I'm like, you know, you end up people losing their whole life over nothing. Like they get nothing out of this. Their lives are completely in shambles. You know what I mean? They end up having kids. You know what I mean? They get divorced. They can't have real relations. Anyway, so to me, that was one of those great evils that I saw, was that it was all just platitudes of superiority by acceptance, but there was no standard of actual living or moral life or anything else, you know?
Right.
And brutal, man. And it was brutal.
Well, you mentioned before about the demonic activity and how it begins to sort of break down the body. You mentioned, you know, health problems, and this was something that I witnessed during this sort of transitory period in Berkeley. One of the fellow PhD students, she was a Thelemite, and I, with other people in the class, we were invited to go to a ritual they were having at their house temple. And again, this is me as a non-believer promoting psychedelics. Oh, okay, I'll check it out, just as friends. And we get there, and this turned out to be a Gnostic mass. And you know, we get in the house. There's sort of, you know, it's kind of messy. Stuff is everywhere. This woman is in her like 40s or 50s, and she has a relationship with like the priest, and they have other people there. And this is like an open relationship thing that's going on. And this was stuff I wasn't really exposed. I thought I was in favor of all this stuff, but I've never really been around it. And go to the house. We go out on the back deck. There's rats everywhere. And again, this is just symbolic of sort of the energy of this place. There's rats everywhere in the backyard. I'm like, oh my gosh. And we go and witness this Gnostic mass where it ends. The crescendo is at the end. The woman is totally nude with her legs open on the altar, and you're supposed to go up and, the people, I didn't, but they go up and they like make out with her. And this is like the submitting of what your desire. So you're supposed to go here and like have a desire, and you kind of witness and participate in this ritual. And this is going to help you manifest whatever it is that you wanted. And I just had such an uncomfortable feeling, and I couldn't really put my finger on it because I thought I was in favor of a lot of this stuff. But unfortunately, and Lord have mercy, but this person ended up passing away recently. She ended up getting a severe case of cancer and all this stuff. But it made me think about, when you're talking about demonic activity breaking down the body, I've been talking about this as well in regards to what we're seeing with sort of the transgender movement and people desecrating their bodies, and this liberal idea of total acceptance is no, where is the correcting mechanism in our society to try to help people actually become better versions of themselves? And this demonic force that is sort of pervasive in our culture is subtly getting people to destroy the image of God in themselves. And I have witnessed this so many times, especially related to the drug culture. And that's where the psychedelics or even constant cannabis use, it opens you up to demonic influence, eventually demonic possession. It could be the slightest degree and you're not even aware of it. But me witnessing the sort of people that are a part of this culture, it's constantly the same thing. Their bodies breaking down, diseases, ailments, addictions of different sorts. Can you speak a little bit to what you've witnessed in regards to that phenomenon?
Yeah. I mean, I think number one is like, I can't help but thinking about it, but like, it's the debasement of the human body, right?
Yeah.
And we know that man is psychosomatic. He's soul and body together. We're not, and you'll even hear people in our culture, like Joe Rogan's a good example, where he'll talk about being in his meat suit.
Right.
There's a degradation of the body, or
Right.
that the body is, from the apes or from the animals or from evolution, right? Like the body is this lesser aspect of who we are. It's a Gnosticism, or really it's a Neoplatonism, where the physical is lower than the spiritual, and I'm a spiritual person trapped in a physical body. But I mean, in terms of demonic possession or demonic activity, I mean, yeah, it's very clear, not only from writings and whatnot, and in experience, which is, if you look at it, a person who is mentally ill, meaning that their mind is sick or broken in some way, which is also a spiritual illness.
Yes.
You typically find people like this that are what are some of the attributes, right? Being overweight.
Yep.
I mean, just being overweight, like not caring for themselves, like not caring about how they look. There is a psychological correspondence between how I look and feel about myself and how I think and perceive myself to be, and what I perceive to be important, right? So I mean, that's an easy one. The easiest one is like, look at somebody who's like overweight or out of shape.
Yep.
A lot of, not all the time, right? Like we don't want to judge anybody. I'm not saying that, right? But like, there is a lot of times where somebody who is has bad thoughts about themselves or unforgiveness, man, there are so many times it manifests itself in illness. Just like spiritual health can manifest itself as healing. I was watching the video with Elder Thaddeus from the book Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives, and somebody's like, Father, can a person really cure themselves of cancer? And he's like, so wise. He's like, basically, not that they can cure themselves of cancer, but God can cure them, basically, if they ask him. And it's so profound, because you're like, wait a minute. Now, some of the saints prayed for cancer. that's a whole nother topic, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that like well-being is not always the right criteria, because there are people who suffer from being sickly or whatever else. But certainly when we see people in the what's it called, deformation movement, whether that's trans or self-harm or body modification or
Yep.
mutilation, uh, there are like numerous studies. I just saw a thing the other day, like literally the other day, about the rates of anxiety with people who get face tattoos.
Mm.
When somebody, and again, what is the, the icon? I mean, and I'm not a Pharisee. I mean, I'm covered in tattoos, man. So like that's a whole different topic.
Right.
I don't get tattooed obviously anymore, but and so I'm not, anyways, that's a side conversation. But in terms of when we see the icon, we always see the face, and you see people literally like hiding their face behind all of these symbols or signs or whatever else,
Right.
And I just saw something the other day that was it was Post Malone was getting his face tattooed, and I think it says something like, "This is my meat suit," or something like that, like something totally Gnostic and
Right.
and Neoplatonic, and then at the same time, it's like prevalent right on his face, right? So like it distorts even the vision of how you see a person. But a lot of times, I've seen it with people who were formerly. Most of the time, I've seen it with people who are formerly in the occult. A
Yeah.
lot of times when they come to orthodoxy, they actually suffer from physical illness and physical ailments. Sorry, illness and ailments,
Yeah.
and that they are basically almost withdrawing themselves from that darkness, but that darkness still has a hold on their body, right? The devil is always breaking down, destroying, mutilating the person, the image of God.
Right.
A good man, I hate to say this, but like an example of this is I was talking with a priest, and I don't know. I'll skip that one. It's maybe I'll go too far. But anyways, the point is that it's degrading the human body. And,
Right.
and if you look at, especially when you look at our society, and especially the way that it sees sex and sexuality and the way that it is portrayed, it's all about degrading women, and it's destroying any kind of nobility that a woman has. A woman
Right.
is seen as like an object,
Right.
as a nothingness,
I've highlighted that the
yeah,
contemporary woman is, I mean, at least what's being promoted through the Cardi B's and the Nicki Minaj, it's the inversion of the Theotokos, right? It's not about
yeah,
purity. It's not about submission to a true authority, God, saying yes to God. It's not about having children and building families and stewarding life. It's about sex. It's about promiscuity. It's about, really, in a way, it's the weaponization of sex, which is tying to a feminization of men. Because if you as a man are only led by your sexual passions, and then the culture, the demonic forces is making sex more and more and more prevalent, you're losing your agency. You're
yeah.
totally being sucked into this. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, what is the curse for women? After the fall, the curse for women is your desire will be for your husband. That's not the curse. And he will lord it over you, right? The fact that men will take a natural desire of women desiring men and their affirmation and desiring their headship, but that the fallen man, the broken, the unspiritual man will lord his headship over his wife, and basically use it to kind of, in a sense, not beat her into submission, but to make her subservient to himself. So
Right.
what have women done? They're afraid of that natural desire for a husband, and so they go, listen, it's a trap. This is always the devil, right? The
Right.
devil's always like, that's a trap. Your desire for your husband is a trap. So what you need to do is make sure that your husband is subservient to you. So then the woman makes the man subservient to her through emotional manipulation, withholding sex, all these things that happen in marriage, in the
Right.
way that women do modern day marriages. And then and then they basically castrate their husbands, and they make them afraid emotionally of their wives. Like, this is a reality. I'm telling you this as a priest. Like,
Yep.
This is what happens, not just in the world, but in the Orthodox Church also. And then what ends up happening is the wife looks and then she like has no respect for the husband because now the husband's not really a man. He poses no threat to her.
Right.
She's castrated him both mentally as his identity as a man, as being the head of the family, as having authority. All of those things have been castrated. And then physically, that he's just there when she's ready to give him sex or whatever else. He doesn't have any agency or desire of his own.
Right.
It's all subservient. So it takes the whole relationship and throws it on its head. And then she's completely dissatisfied.
Right.
Because she's like, well, now I'm married to kind of why is my husband withdrawn?
Right.
Why is he an emotional eunuch? Why won't he connect with me? Why doesn't he tell me how he feels? Well, you punish him every time he does. So he's not going to. Now, this happens in and outside the church. Now, when you look at the hypersexualization with, say, a Cardi B, what's so the great irony is, right? She's setting herself up in this idolatrous position as being like the pinnacle of sex and sexual desire.
Female liberation.
Yeah, and all these different things. And then what's her husband doing? He's cheating on her.
Right.
He's sleeping. He doesn't even want her. And then because she can't get away from her natural instinct and desire, she stays with her husband.
Right.
Husband keeps cheating. She wants to give him more chances. She's painting herself to all these other men in the world as saying, like, I am this pinnacle of you should want me. It's like your own husband doesn't want you.
Right.
What does that tell you? Like your own husband wants to be with other women. You're not offering anything that's amazing in any way, shape, or form because you're so distorted as a person.
Yeah.
And the saddest part too is you're going to start to see, just like we see in Hollywood, all these people and their children. What is it, man? All their children, they all get hooked on drugs, overdosing, dying, rehabs, the whole thing, because the whole family is mutilated, infected with this illness, this demonic spirituality, and this upside down world, you know? So it's anyways.
You talking about the modern day relationship of these sort of liberated women that are still in marriages, it reminds me of the tantric goddess in India, Kali. And she is standing with blood dripping from her mouth, the heads of men, a necklace of men, while she's standing with her foot on top of the chest of Shiva, also, another Hindu god. But this tantrism, this is considered always the left-handed path, and this is the inversion of typical order, and they believe this is a form of spiritual liberation. But we're seeing this play itself out in the Western culture right now, and relationships are at an all-time, especially successful relationships, are at an all-time low right now. And
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, and I mean, again, so if you take a woman and you go, look, if you say, look, listen, what's going to make you happy as a woman is going to be to be a helper to your husband, the heart of the family, a nurturer, a lover, all these things. It's totally vulnerable.
Right.
It's a scary role because it's all vulnerable. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But the fear shouldn't be there if you have a godly man, because the godly man is sent to protect your femininity, your purity, the gentleness, your womanness. That's what he's there for. Now, this is where it gets twisted within, I believe, within a lot of Western Protestantism, even people coming into Orthodoxy, is the man says, I'm the head, so therefore I'm in this position of power. It's like I'm actually kind of the ruler. And it's no, like that's not the head.
Right.
The head is Christ. He's the servant leader. He's the one who lays down his life for the people that he loves, and he loves them more than he loves himself.
Right.
So the wife is able to trust and follow the husband and give her heart to him because she sees he loves me more than he loves himself. Now, that doesn't mean the husband placates. He doesn't mean he doesn't contradict his wife, right? Like all those nonsense of like happy wife, happy life, just listen to your wife, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff is nonsense. You've got to kind of, again, the royal path, you've got to walk in the middle. Like you've got to get rid of on the right-hand side, which I think is a lot of Protestantism today, which is like women submit to men, men are the authority, men are the headship. That's not it. Not in a real understanding and not in a real relationship or a real marriage is that the case. And then the left-hand side where it's like, it's just a free-for-all or an equality or women are the same as men. It's always the middle, which is like women are wonderful. They're spectacular. They're amazing. They're incredible. They have this particular calling from God that's very sweet and tender and beautiful and motherly and nurturing. And the husband is there in order to protect all of this. And his masculinity is manifested in his servant leadership.
Right.
Now, he can't be a good servant leader if he doesn't take care of himself.
Right.
He has to be the vision of what it looks like to be healthy and to be normative. Like when we get into talking about weightlifting is a perfect example, which is like, dude, men need to set the bar for their sons. You know, you get in, I'm like, you get in these situations where you got a guy who looks like he's 6 months pregnant and he's like, why won't my wife listen to me? And it's like, there's not a man on this earth that would follow you, let alone your wife, because you don't, forgive me, you don't look like a man.
Right. I always highlight that men are better judges of other men than women are, because when men get together, we naturally sort ourselves out, whether we're playing sports, lifting weights, going places, and we're always jabbing at each other to try to test each other, but it's friendly camaraderie as well. And
of course,
but what you were talking about made me think of something that I sort of reiterate all the time. And so forgive me, chat, but talking about masculinity and boundaries. And this is where even the psychedelics play in, and why I wanted to begin with that is that one of the things Terence McKenna would always say as a positive, which I agree with him, but consider it a detriment, is that psychedelics dissolve boundaries. And they absolutely do. I think both of us would agree they dissolve this sort of noetic boundary between the spiritual and the real,
between reality and imagination or delusion. I mean, they erase that. Am I tripping? Am I seeing this? Is this really happening? And
so this dissolution of boundaries isn't just, now I think the psychedelics are indicative of this process at a very intense and extreme degree, but we're seeing it with no border, no wall, no USA at all. The idea that of no national boundaries, no boundaries between genders, no boundaries between man and animal, no boundaries between man and machine. This is a movement towards, again, this false understanding of like pure unity is utopia. And we're going to dissolve all distinctions and boundaries between things. And this is a feminizing effect, because I argue that men are like castle walls and women or children are like the jewels within inside the castle walls. Men build boundaries and we defend those boundaries, whether it be war, whether it be tradition, whether it be value systems. And what we've seen now is that men don't stand for much of anything because they don't have a strict value system. They don't have a tradition. They don't have honor in regards to defend. And so the walls have crumbled in our society. And now, you know, in a way, the things that have been prized have been looted. We're seeing transgender children. We're seeing, you know, states legalize blocking puberty for young kids. We're seeing again, and the sexualization of women, all this different stuff. So my point being is that we're seeing the dissolution of boundaries at an intense degree, and it causes chaos. And part of what it means to be a man is to, one, figure out what your boundaries are and uphold those boundaries, whether it be just like the wife walking over her husband. At some point, if you're a man, you have to have a boundary that once crossed, you know, there's something happens. I'm not saying you be violent or anything, but there has to be consequences to a violation of respect and boundaries. But we don't have that. And so we see this feminization of men in the Western world continually.
Yeah, see, and I would draw a distinction there. Like, one thing I would say, or not a distinction, I would add something to that, because I think you're like 95% of the way there. Number one is women are more empathetic than men as their disposition.
Right.
So they do have a tendency to, what can you say? Like, let things go farther than they should, out of their empathy and out of the fact that they're nurturing and caring, right? Like, but it's also, look, it's also Christ and the Mother of God. Remember that. Like, think about the monks of Vatopedi. Remember this story. Oh man, what's the icon? It's not the Portaisia. Oh, I'm gonna draw a blank right now. But anyways, remember the bandits show up at the monastery and they're hiding in the bushes outside, and they're gonna go in and basically slaughter, enslave, pillage the Vatopedian monks. And the abbot, as he's like walking to the front door, I believe it's the abbot, if I have it correctly, the Mother of God speaks from the icon, and she says to him, "Don't open the door. The bandits, these pirates, are outside the gate, and they're going to rush in." And then Christ covers her mouth and says, "Mother, these lazy monks are going to deserve what they're getting."
Oh,
And then
wow.
the Mother of God pushes his hand aside. Seriously, pushes his hand aside and says, "Don't open the gate. They're going to come." So then he's like, "Thank you, thank you, our mother." And then they've done like an akathist to the Mother of God for this event for like 1,000 years or something like that, or
Wow.
800 years, all because she saved him. But it's very much it's an intrinsic part of womanhood to kind of try to nurture and kind of let things go a little bit farther. I mean, this is why we say at the judgment seat, the Mother of God intercedes for us.
Mhm.
It's the same thing in a family. Like your kid starts acting up, you as the dad are like, you're like, boom, like you crossed the line. Mama's like, "Don't, give me a second. He's tired right now. He's been outside, he's playing." And then she just kind of shuffles them away.
Right.
She's like, you're like Christ, and she's like the Mother of God. She's like interceding for sinners.
Right.
She's like constantly like,
That's funny.
like,
Yeah.
like, so there is a natural aspect to this. But the other thing I was going to say is that when women have, how can I put it, a right worldview, I guess is what I would say, and depending on their disposition, they become more manly. And if you think about actually what's the piece of advice from St. Paisios, where they're like, "What kind of woman should you marry?" What does he say? He's like, "You should marry a manly woman." That's what he says. And what he
Hmm.
means by that is not a woman who's not feminine, okay? Because a woman can be feminine and manly, but what he's talking about is principles. And he
Yes.
talks about in his book on married life how there's one woman that is super tough. It's like she's like almost like she's like a strong woman competitor, basically. She's like throwing stuff around. She's like as strong as the guys. But then when she comes home, she has a husband who's smaller than her. Okay. But he says every time she interacts with him, she's like very tender and is like obedient to him. So it's not that she doesn't have any masculine characteristics or doesn't have any manliness. In fact, this is lauded as something that's beneficial, even in the sayings of the Desert Fathers. There's one of the sayings of the Desert Fathers that talks about one of the nuns, and it says she was more manly than all the men in that place.
Hmm.
And it's not said as a negative thing. It means that she was like hardcore. She was disciplined, she was principled, and she was like, so the same thing. If you meet my wife is very, very feminine. She's not girly. She's very feminine, and she has a very strong feminine energy. But if you try to say or do something that's going to, like, how can I put it, like poison her boys, like she's stinking nitro, like she is like full on mama bear, like
Right.
protectress. But it's because she has principles. She has those principles, and so she has very, very clear boundaries. So I
Right.
wouldn't say like it's that women don't have boundaries.
No, no,
It's
no.
depending
And
on
I
the
wasn't
person
saying
they're—
they don't
yeah.
have boundaries. My point is
No,
that
no,
even your wife having where do they come from? They come from tradition. They come from Christ. They come
Mhm.
from Christianity. My point is
That's right.
boundaries themselves are masculine. And you made my point by saying that manly women are upholding by through discipline and principle. That's my point. And that
Yes,
what
yes,
we see today with feminized men is they have no discipline, they have no principles, they have no values, they have nothing to
that is
defend.
correct.
And so that's where the weightlifting, that's where reading scripture, prayer, like becoming disciplined is the counterculture, because that's what's going to give you the fortitude to continue to become a more masculine man so that you can defend and you can be of a use to other people. And that's what within many of the men here in this live chat, they're looking for those virtuous women that I guess from that perspective would have a sort of manliness to them because they're going to stand up for principles, for value sets. But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but this the lack of that discipline in our society is creating the simp. I mean, and that's where you look at the OnlyFans phenomenon in our, I mean, who's paying for all this stuff? You think masculine men of tradition and value and virtue are paying women to get naked? No, of course not. And this is a real problem. And that's where, like, you've talked about weightlifting and stuff like that. These are almost a necessity in the 21st century to be a man. Not that you need to be a bodybuilder or a power lifter or anything like that. The point is that you need to have some type of physical presence, and you need to have the value set to actually fulfill the virtue of your life.
At the very least, you need to be at least a power lifter. I mean, at the very least, I mean, we gotta set boundaries. Brother.
That's true.
Like, we need clear boundaries. At least compete in powerlifting, minimum. No, I mean, I think what you're saying is really, if you were to distill it down, what I often say is be an asset, don't be a liability.
Right.
So, you know, and I said to somebody the other day, I said, there's nothing worse than having a church work day and a bunch of out of shape dudes show up and like can't work with a tool or do anything for more than 2 hours before they're all gassed. And then they just want to drink beer. Like, that's pathetic. Like,
right.
that is pathetic. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we were created to be workers. Like, that's what we were made to be as men. I mean, you read the life of St. Paisios, even with all his prayer and fasting and everything else, he's talking about working like 12 hours a day. Read St. Joseph the Hesychast and the way that those dudes worked every single day, like 10-hour plus days. And then they were doing 8 hours of vigil at night, you know, and sleeping 6 hours. Like, we are meant to be physical.
Yeah.
And we are meant to be physically capable as men. It's part of who God made us to be. It's you can't be you can't be out of shape and falling apart physically and somehow mystically be spiritually healthy and put together and well. Right. I don't think that there's a correlation. We don't see that. I'll tell you a funny story. One of my favorite, you'll appreciate this, but one of my favorite stories from my time at seminary was the dean of our seminary for a while was Father Alexander Addy. He was an Antiochian priest. And he had gone to Mount Athos, and this was back, I think, in the 70s. And so he had, you would travel to Mount Athos, you would get the visa, you would get there. You only wrote letters. I don't think they even had phones on Mount Athos at the time. And you would hike from monastery to monastery. Like, it was really intense. Like, you would go to Athos for like a month just so that you could hike to different places, because the hikes were like 10-hour hikes between monasteries. It was awesome. So he goes to Mount Athos and he ends up meeting, his family's Lebanese. So he ends up meeting this monk named Hieromonk Isaac. Hieromonk Isaac is the one who wrote the book on St. Paisios, the big green thick book. Okay.
Yeah.
So he meets Hieromonk Isaac. Hieromonk Isaac basically tells him, listen, you're in seminary, you want to be a priest. He goes, you got to lose weight. He's like, you can't be fat and be a priest. So Father Alexander says, okay, blah, 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 blah. He goes back to America, goes back to seminary, right? Within a year, he hasn't lost the weight. And then the Metropolitan of the Antiochians at the time says, we're ordaining you. So then they ordain him a priest, okay? So now he's become a priest. He's got his cross, whatever else. He goes back. I don't think he had a cross because he was Antiochian. So he probably just had a cassock and an exo rasa, whatever. But now it's the next year, he goes back to Mount Athos. And so, of course, Hieromonk Isaac doesn't know anything. He didn't call him, didn't tell him, whatever. Maybe he wrote him a letter or something. I don't know. But he gets there, gets his visa, travels to the island. He's hiking out. He gets to his little skeet, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Knocks on the door through the prayers of our Holy Father, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, mercy on us and save us. Hieromonk Isaac opens the door, looks at him, and he goes, fat priest, no priest. And then slams the door in his face.
Wow.
So and then after that, he's like, forgive me, da, 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 da. He's like, I'm sorry, Abuna, da, 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 da. And then he said, like, so after that, he got super serious, like stopped. He like started fasting more, I think is what it was. He started eating less, started exercising all the time.
Yeah.
And then it was through the disappointment of his spiritual father saying, this doesn't cut it.
Right.
You know, and you were saying earlier, we as men set the standard for other men
Right.
of like, hey, what's acceptable, what's normal. And you know, I just you know, I think it's even when I was ordained, you know, people were like, oh, don't worry, there's room in your cassock so you can grow into it. And I was like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
I don't want to. I grew up, my dad was out of shape and my dad was overweight. And when I was growing up, I was like, I had no respect for him. First of all, by the time I was 14, I mean, I basically told him, look, if you ever put your hands on me again, like I'll end you. But I was 14 years old and I could take a grown man. And I
Right.
was like, but
Wow.
what it was, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a good ideal
Right.
relationship that you
Right.
should have with your parent, right? But what I'm saying is, I always looked at that and said, that's the number, like one of the number one things with my kids, especially because they're boys, is they need to see a standard of manhood that is healthy and normal. And
Yes.
it's not normal if you can't work a full day, you know, do hard labor. Like if you can't sweat and do things that a man can do, it's no bueno. Now, there are some people who just their genetic disposition, they're skinnier or whatever else. God bless them. Like, you know what I mean? Fasting, there's ascetics, you know. In my experience from being a priest, there's been times where you know, I fasted more and other things, and it was very blessed. My experience has been living in the world. It's more beneficial for me with children and a wife to be physically capable
Right.
because at the drop of a hat, if anything goes south, I'm the only one who can basically take care of things physically, whether
Right.
that's defending my family, changing a tire, getting us out of a jam. If everything falls apart, I can go do manual labor. I
Right.
go work. You know what I mean? So everything is dependent on you as a man to hold that standard and for your sons to look at you and say, like, my dad's legit. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like he
Well,
can he can hold his own.
and you mentioned that one of your sons said that one of the things he wouldn't want to have is a weak father. Like that's embarrassing.
Yeah. So he said, so here's the quote. So he said, it's funny. So yeah, I was telling my wife, you know, we were talking about it, and I said, no, I said, what will happen is we'll be watching TV or something, right? Like, or a movie, whatever, something come on, you know, or something on YouTube. We don't have cable, but you know what I'm saying. Um, we'll be watching something, a movie, whatever else, something will come up. And what do my boys always ask me? They're always like, Dad, are you stronger than him? Like all the time. Like they're trying to, I mean, I'm not a psychology guy, but as far as like dominance hierarchy,
Right. They're trying to see
like
where their dad fits in.
dude, it's a total innate thing. Like,
Because
where
boys
do
get
you
it. When
set
they
like
work when they play with other boys, that's what the boys are doing.
exactly? Oh, they talk about it now. Like one of the boys is like, man, this kid never came back to church. He beat me at arm wrestling. I need him to come back to church so I can arm wrestle him again and like beat him. Like you dude, it's so innate. So, anyways, they were like, they're so I was talking to my wife. I said, I'm telling you, this is like big for them to figure out where their dad stacks up. So I think she thought I was over emphasizing the need to lift weights and to be strong. And so she asked them the next day, like, well, is it really important that dad is big and strong and all this and whatever? And they're like, oh yeah, this is like really important. And my 11-year-old said, it's the shame of a boy who has a weak dad.
Mm.
And she was like, it's like that's the homeschool education part right there. Like, like all these, you know, like listening to all these great books and everything else is like very high level of articulation. But I thought it was so funny and so telling that it's true. Like,
Right.
I can remember being a kid and being 14 or 15 and looking at my dad and being like, he looks pathetic. Like,
Right.
he's not strong. He's out of shape. Like, he doesn't give the presence of a man. Nobody thinks that he's a man. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well,
Well,
so it's yeah.
And this is why the patriarchy within orthodoxy is so important, because I've mentioned before with other priests that have come on, the way that it looks to me, especially with a lot of the things that have been happening in the Catholic Church in the last decade, that the last true patriarchy is the Orthodox Church, and that's the patriarchy that comes, you know, blessed by God, that comes down through Abraham, and
Mm,
we all need, just like you're talking about a father, we all need a father, and that's true for our spiritual fathers of being the leader spiritually, having having that discipline, having that ascetic, practice. And I want you to get into asceticism and how weightlifting and the Orthodox life of prayer and fasting go hand in hand in regards to sort of forming a masculine mentality. But this is why, like my priest, we're going to be celebrating his 91st birthday this coming Sunday. And I am so thankful for him for being the man that he is, to see, like, when I'm 90 years old, I want to be like him. And it gives me something to aspire to, just like your son's looking at you in regards to strength or anything like that. And so I think that these go hand in hand with what it means to be an Orthodox Christian in the 21st century. We don't work a bunch of manual labor like we used to back in the day. So now
Yeah.
people are sitting around all the time, and it's like,
Yeah.
guys, we got to get out. You got to work your body, because if you don't,
Yeah.
you're
I think
underutilizing what God's given you.
I think that and I think that's like one thing that I would say is, and somebody said this to me early on when I became a priest, which was, you definitely need some kind of hobby as a man. What you need is, you have your family life, and you have your work life, and you have your church life, right? You basically have three kind of areas of your life, but you need some area of your life where you can blow off steam and get your kind of energy out. And honestly, inside of every man is a bit of a boy.
Yeah.
And what do boys like? They like having fun, they like competition, they like playing, right? Like, you need something that kind of feeds the boy in you,
Right.
that makes you feel alive. And when you were a kid, I mean, when I grew up, yeah, I grew up and I drew and did other things, but what else did I do? I'd go get on my bicycle and ride for like 6 hours. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so you need something that's kind of playful in that way, that gives you the sense of kind of fun or enjoyment that you don't get from going to work. Work is not enjoyment. They
Right.
pay you money. That's why, because if they didn't pay you money, you wouldn't show up. Like,
Right.
that's what a job is. Now, with your family, we've already talked about it. Your goal is to be the servant leader and to be pouring yourself out.
Right.
Well, any mother and father will tell you it's exhausting. Having kids, especially a bigger family, is exhausting. It's a lot of output. So you need an area of your life, your spiritual life, where you pray and you get strength from God. And then you need an area of your life where you can kind of get energy out, negative energy out, and you can express yourself. And also, ideally, it's something that you end up cultivating doing with your kids,
Mm-hmm.
so that there's that communal aspect of it as well. I look at hobbies and I go, if your hobby is I don't know, like, painting models or something, like, there's no real benefit for anybody besides yourself, but maybe it's good for you to do it. I'm not saying it's not virtuous or not good. When I see weightlifting, I'm like, there's a huge carryover to every aspect of your life. Like, it gives you an authority in multiple areas of your life, and especially with your kids, and especially if you have sons, it gives them a sense of authority. Like, it gives you a sense of authority with them. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, they buy into your leadership when they see, like, well, dad's a lot bigger and a lot stronger than all of us. You know what I
Right.
mean? I may not be taller, but I'll be bigger. You know what I mean?
Well,
definitely stronger.
and that's
So
that
they,
leads to,
yeah,
I was going to say that leads into the next question I wanted to ask you, because right now the manosphere is like one of the hottest things on the internet, right? And so we had the Andrew Tate phenomenon, all this different stuff. And from an Orthodox perspective, certainly the relationships that they're advocating for aren't filled with Christ. And it's more of a sort of dictatorial relationship where you basically have so much value that a woman is dependent upon you.
yeah.
But my question is, as a priest, as an Orthodox priest, as a power lifter, as a man, what are some of the biggest concerns you have in regards to raising traditionally masculine boys in the 21st century? Because now we have the American Psychological Association literally saying traditional masculinity is toxic, that it's related to mental illness and all these different problems, and yet we're Orthodox Christians, and our tradition doesn't stand if we don't produce strong, traditional, virtuous men.
Yeah, I don't really have any concerns. Like, I just don't care. I just like have zero care of what's going on in the culture.
Well, you
So like,
mentioned homeschooling, right? So you've already
like
cared about education. So they're not
I
in public
homeschool my
schools.
kids.
They're not being taught about
Yeah, like
trans agenda.
correct. And
So
when they
that's what I
see
mean
that
is there's a lot there. I mean, you've already taken
stuff, okay,
measures
like,
to ensure that you raise
yeah,
traditionally masculine
we're
boys.
just
Not
living
everybody. Yeah.
right. We're just living like Orthodox, which is we're living in the world, but we're living outside of society,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is like what Christ means when he says in the world, not of it.
Right.
So for instance, we did a deadlift meet recently. It's like a deadlift competition thing. So I got some of the guys from the church to sign up with me. So me and 3 other dudes from the church all signed
Oh,
up.
that's awesome.
And then another buddy of mine who's a weightlifting friend of mine came and signed up also. And then there were some people who showed up there in costume, one of which was a guy who dressed as a woman, and I can't control that, but when he walked in, like my boys were like they were just like
Love
they
it.
were just I didn't teach them that. They just looked and they were like repulsed. They're like, what
Right.
is this guy doing? You don't, it's so funny because like they will naturally come up with a lot of their own ideas about things that you won't even teach them. Okay.
Mm.
For instance, all right, I'll give you some funny stories. Like one of my kids, one time we were talking and they were like, well, Dad, you work with women. And I said, yeah, there are some women who have to go to work for various reasons. They can't afford it, whatever else. Just giving them kind of general information, obviously that's not the ideal. And, sometimes it has to happen, whatever else. The ideal is if a husband can, basically provide for his wife. And one of the kids like, I don't like it when women go to work. And I'm just like, I didn't tell him that. We've never said that. We've never taught that. Like we've never even said anything like that. But they have formed in their own mind their criterion of what's acceptable and not, what's masculine and not masculine. Sometimes they're off. Like they get a little bit out there. One of them was like, there was a woman driving a truck today, Dad. And I'm like, well, women can drive trucks. There's no prohibition against women driving trucks, but they get, again, they form these ideas and these thoughts based on the environment that they're in, but some of it is just intrinsic. You know what I mean?
Right.
So honestly, the only thing that I ever really get concerned about or even have a second thought about is sexuality stuff.
Mm.
And that's the only thing and thank God, like, if something immodest comes on, whatever, in a cartoon even or something else or whatever, you know what I mean? They'll all make the sign of the cross. They'll all look away. Awesome. They have a very strong sense of what's acceptable. I remember there was a couple years ago, like my wife put a skirt on, and I can't remember if she was pregnant or what, but it was like 3 inches above her knees. And she was wearing like leggings. Okay. So it's like not even bare skin. One of the boys was like, can't wear that out, Mom. Just they're like, that's just not modest enough,
Right.
And the funny thing is, so they develop this innate sense. And this is what we were talking about in terms of the difference between Orthodoxy and Protestantism. Orthodoxy gets into the heart and it's internal. It's not something you know what I mean? It's like you don't have to tell them to act a certain way.
Right.
They have an internal compass. Right? Like for instance, I used to be a commercial roofer. So I was commercial roofer. I mean, I was out on flat roofs 5 days a week, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. for like over 2 years or whatever. And then they gave me an office job. I didn't even want it. They gave me this office job. And it was just whatever. It was for the sake of the family. It was me dying to. My wife was like, go back to being. She was like, you hate this. Go back to roofing. And I was like, no, because it pays way better and it's way more stable for the family. So I'll die to what I enjoy doing for the sake of the family. That's the martyrdom aspect, right? I'm like, it doesn't make sense for me to go make less money and have less benefits and less stable schedule. None of that is beneficial to the family. So anyways, I got this job and then I'm eating every day like I'm a roofer. Like I'm packing my sandwiches the same and everything else. Dude, I'm not burning like 4,000, 5,000 calories a day. So within like 3 months of taking this office job, I went from like probably 175 and like 175, and I could probably crank out like 24 pull-ups to being like 190. And all of a sudden I was like, we got to do something about this. Nobody had to tell me, hey, bro, you're getting a little bit pudgy. My wife never even said anything. You know what I mean? I just knew, I go, this is not the body type that I'm going for.
Right.
It's the same thing. You know, I notice this a lot when we get into sexuality with guys, which is like, look, you have to be the type of man that hates pornography to not look at pornography.
Right.
You have to believe that pornography is below your nobility as a man,
right.
and that it's degrading to these women who are made in the image of God. That has to come from inside, because otherwise it's just behavior.
Right.
It's just, we're just telling you not to do something that you really want to do, and you're trying and you're struggling. You have to have that hardcore sense of like, I will die on this hill of not participating in this behavior. And people, like, again, women want a man who is like emotionally stable and safe and all these things. A man has to be a bit unbalanced. Because a man is at war. It's true.
Right.
At some level, he has to be at war with his passions, and he has to be very fired up and engaged. He can't be a passive guy. He can't be a go with the flow. Like, you know, you have to have some fire inside of you that is willing to do violence against yourself, because it's the only, you're like, I am dealing with a hedonistic, you know, lawless person that's myself, but I'm going to make him submit, and I'm going to do violence against him. You know, that's, I mean, St. Joseph the Hesychast, shed blood, gain the spirit. You have to be willing to shed your blood. And Christ saying the kingdom of heaven is taken by force. Violent men seek to take it. Well, who are those violent men? The Holy Fathers tell us, those who are willing ascetically to do violence against themselves. You have to be fired up. You have to be engaged in that fight. If you're not, you're dead. You're dead. It's too easy. It's too easy to eat too much, sleep too much. You know what I mean? Give in too much. Like, all of that is just too easy. It's too easy. And even when people are like having sweets in the house, I'm like, get it out of the house. I'm like, we're not built for discipline, like self-discipline. We're not built for self-control. That's not how we function.
Right.
We're built to go, a lot of times, the easiest path. And so we've got to find a way to make our life purposefully difficult. We have to force that on ourselves. And in fact, when you look at the early Christians, why did monasticism come about? Monasticism came about because the Christians at the time said, look, it's legalized. Nobody's killing us. There's no persecution. And Christianity is getting soft. They were like, it's not good for us. They're like, we need to go out in the desert in order to have some struggle so that we can acquire the Holy Spirit. If we don't have that, and if our mindset is like not in that fight, we're done.
Right.
We're done. Like,
well, that's what in Orthodoxy teaches us, to not shy away from suffering. Whether, and you highlighted this, the pain and discipline it takes to be in the gym, but also fighting our passions, dealing with things that are going on in the culture. Suffering is an opportunity for spiritual growth. And without suffering, we can't grow to the same degree spiritually. And this is what and that's where Orthodoxy totally changed my worldview, like from that, because as we're talking about the psychedelics, the new age, it's all about pleasure. It's not about, we need to do away with suffering. Suffering is seen as an evil. And it was, again, this was a 180 turn once I began to try to acquire the Orthodox front about to see, no. That's exactly why I was becoming more feminine. That's exactly why I was becoming weaker. That's exactly why I was being bombarded by my own passions.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're killing it. That's exactly it. Yeah. You have to be, you have to see that all of that kind of laissez-faire kind of attitude and kind of go with the flow and all of that, you know, you don't want the smoke is detrimental. The only thing that grows because of adversity. you know, and the same laws that govern weightlifting govern the spiritual life also. You know, somebody emailed me. They saw the podcast I did with Buck, and they emailed me and they were like, hey, how do you work out and lift weights and fast and whatever? I know that fasting isn't like totally required or whatever. It's kind of negotiable, but blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I was like, I can't even respond to this email right now. Too fired up. But I mean, that's what it's become. The asceticism in orthodoxy in America is like, oh, well, fasting or long services or vigil or what's required is like lowest common denominator.
Right.
And so you see it with I hate to say it, but I mean, you see it all over the place where everything is feminized into, well, you know, like, dude, listen, it's not going to be fun to eat vegan for Lent. That's not going to be enjoyable. But the question is that part of the journey? It's like, dude, it's 100%.
Yeah.
You know, there's no saints who didn't fast. The only time they didn't fast was when they were like super sickly. We don't have any saints that like didn't fast, right? So it's part of the struggle, but we've become so how can you put it, like seeker friendly almost, that we've neutered the faith, and we're like, oh, we'll cut out parts of the liturgy. I was talking to Father Deacon Ananias, was like, when the jurisdictions are like, oh, we'll cut out parts of the liturgy because the services are too long.
Oh my gosh.
Or we won't do this or we won't do that because this is inconvenient or this is hard. And it's like, listen, we grow because of struggle. You break the muscle down, it grows back stronger.
Right.
That principle is not a weightlifting principle. It's a spiritual principle based on the God who is underpinning the universe. And he put that principle in every aspect of our life.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's why we have growth. We have growth in the face of adversity. We don't have growth in peace. Now, do I want growth in peace? Yes, I do. I do. My flesh desires that. Is that the cross? That's not the cross, right? It's just not. You know, it's like when people say, "Oh, Father, like, what's the Orthodox position on birth control?" Or like, do we need to have so many kids? Or this or that. The whole point is that people want to get rid of the cross.
Right.
You know, I had a priest once tell me, Western Christianity is crossless Christianity.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is the best summation I have ever heard, because it is. It removes the martyrdom. The whole point in Orthodoxy is it's the martyrdom of yourself.
Right.
That's why it's so hard. You know,
and that's why it's attracting so many young men. I mean, and I'm curious to hear maybe your experience with your own parish, but what we're seeing online as content creators, and then even with my own parish, is it's young men that are coming to the Orthodox Church, whether through the understanding of theology or church history or whatever vehicle they get there in. But the challenge of Orthodoxy is appealing. The traditionality of Orthodoxy is appealing because the West has lost all this stuff, and it's continuing, just like the mentality to take out aspects of the liturgy. That's exactly why the Protestant churches can't keep people. I was talking about recently in a stream, I was showing the average age amongst religious organizations in the United States, all Christian denominations except for Orthodoxy, was like 50 or higher. Many of the Protestant churches were 60, 70 on the average age of attendee. The only two that were thriving in regards to young numbers in the United States was Islam and Orthodox Christianity and Mormonism. And so Orthodoxy has at least here in America, we have a real opportunity to try to steward these young men for the next generation. And that's what was leading me in the next part I wanted to talk to you about is, what is some of the advice that you're giving to young men who are coming to the church broken, maybe porn addictions? Because I mean, I was exposed to pornography from my neighbor, my best friend. He had older brothers. I had been like 10 years old when I was first exposed to pornography. And the sexuality of our society, the chaos of gender categories, whatever it may be, everything's up in the air right now. But young men come to the church, and this is going to tie into hyperdoxy, where I want to talk a little bit about that. But trying to find a wife, trying to find a spouse. And some of these young men that I've talked to in one-on-ones, they say, oh, well, I'm Orthodox. I got baptized and I'm waiting for my, my virgin wife to get married. And it's like, bro, you don't even have a full-time job. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you have to work on yourself. You have to become a man that woman even wants to be with. What are you talking? And there's been this idea that they find orthodoxy and it is the truth. And they expect that they're going to get something and like a reward for it, of like finding their, the virgin girl that they're going to marry. And it's like, no, bro, your journey just began. You have to work on yourself. Can you address a little bit? I know there's a lot there, but can you address a little bit on that? Because I think this has been a growing mentality in some young men, is that they get, they think that life's going to get better once they become Orthodox. And that's the wrong mentality to have in regard. Yeah, your spiritual life, absolutely. But in my experience, life got more challenging in multiple facets.
Yeah, I usually typically tell everyone who's going to become a catechumen that that's the case, that their life is going to get worse.
Yeah.
So I always try, and everybody's like, I used to do sales, so it's like you're kind of giving somebody the worst,
the worst sales pitch ever. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, buy this product, it's going to cost you everything, and your life is going to get worse. And they're like, so where's the upside? Yeah, I mean, number one is the fathers tell us to work on whatever is the most prevalent problem or passion in our life. So if somebody comes to me with an issue of pornography, there's a few things I do. Number one is I make sure that they have a prayer rule, right? So nobody's going to overcome this dragon without the grace of God. I remember this many years ago, not at my parish, many years ago, somebody came to me and they said, I can't believe it, Father. They came to confession. I can't. And it was fun. I never even met the person before, never even seen him since. I can't believe it, Father. I looked at porn again. And I said, really? I can believe it. And then they were like, and I said, I would be surprised if you came and said you hadn't been looking at porn. And the light bulb went on, right? Their egotism had them deluded into thinking that they were going to overcome it by themselves.
Right.
And it's like, no, man, the whole life of the Orthodox Christian is that the grace comes into us, and that grace strengthens us against the demonic temptations that we face.
Right.
So the number one thing is we have to find a way to get the grace from God. Prayer, fasting, almsgiving, charitable works, forgiveness, all these things attract the Holy Spirit to us and give us the grace to overcome these desires. They transform us internally, which is the medicine. Right. That's why we call it the medicine, and the church as the hospital, because it transforms us. Right? So when a man looks at a woman who's immodest and he's so attracted to her, right? There's I'll give you an example. There's a story in the Desert Fathers where these monks come into the city, and there's a woman who decides to ride naked, totally naked, on horseback through the city. And there's like 4 monks, and they see her, and 3 of the monks are like horrified, and they like cover themselves, right? Which is a sound decision to make. Let's not pretend like that isn't sound. The 4th one is the elder, and he says, how beautiful is the creation of God. So again, in the words of St. Paul, to the pure, all things are pure. So when we see in the life of a man who comes to the church and he's used to looking at women as sexual objects, as he begins to pray and repent and ask God's forgiveness for doing this, he begins to see women differently.
Right.
He just sees them differently. It's internally. It's not, but it's the Holy Spirit. So now when he's tempted and he sees something immodest, he starts to see a person, not an object. And when he starts to see a person, he starts to have compassion. And then he begins to know and understand their brokenness. And when he understands that it's a person, a very broken person, now as a Christian, he begins to pray for them, right? And instead of turning to lust and saying, oh, this person will satisfy my lustful or sexual desires, he's now, like I said earlier with like my boys, he's now making the sign of the cross. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on that person, because they are losing the image of God, right? They're creating the image of God, but they're not growing into his likeness, and they're becoming distorted. So number one, I do with all my guys, make sure that they have a prayer rule, make sure that they're fasting Wednesdays and Fridays and following the church calendar. Unless there's a very, very critical situation, I honestly, I don't really give economias for fasting. Now I know people who have real physical allergies and other issues. That's a serious situation. But a lot of times people go, well, I fast and I feel weak, or I feel grumpy, or this. It's like, and we all do. Everybody does. Like, it's not enjoyable. Like, that's not a real reason not to fast, right? Now, I've had people who say, Father, I tried to eat beans and like, I can't do this, I can't do that. And we're running down all the food, and they're hyperallergenic because the food today is killing people.
Right.
And they may need an economia, like a legitimate economia. But most of the time, that's after they've been trying to fast. They don't just come into it with that. Making sure they fast. Number three, when guys are really seriously addicted, I have them start to count the days of sobriety that they have, and I have them do daily check-ins. So I have them text me at the end of every day, Father, today is day 35. I did my morning and evening prayers. Nothing else, whatever. Or I'm having this issue, or please pray for me, or da-da-da-da-da. It's accountability. The number one thing with lust and the demon of lust is that the devil loves darkness. And lust is so grimy and dirty that the devil doesn't want you to shine the flashlight on it. He doesn't want you to show what it really is and what's happening. So going to confession, right? Like now, and I'm in Row Corps, so all my guys go to confession every single week, right? I want all my guys coming to confession every single week. Why? They got to stay close.
Right.
You know what I mean? Somebody said it many years ago, but like the wolf doesn't pick off the sheep in the middle of the flock. The wolf picks off the sheep that are out grazing on the outside or falling behind.
Yep.
Right? That's who the wolf gets. He doesn't get the people that are close to the shepherd. And so, those are some of the main things I do when it comes to lust. Number two, it's like, you cannot expect, God does not, you don't deserve anything. Like, God isn't required to give you a wife or all these other things. I mean, the number one thing when guys talk about this stuff, about like, I need to find a wife, the number one thing I'm like, go find women. Well, Father, there's no women at our church, or this or that, or they're all married. It's like, yeah, you need to go to other churches. Like, God isn't going to drop a woman out of the sky. Like, you've got to put in the work. Like, find a Orthodox dating app, which I've heard are mostly garbage. Yeah. Go visit other churches. Dude, if you call other priests, I've told guys like, oh, I want whatever. It's like, email another priest and give them your info and CC me on the email and say, hey, this is how old I am. This is where I'm at in life. And I'm looking for a wife,
That's like, great advice.
You know what I'm saying? But again, it's like, I mean, why does cold calling work? Cold calling works because on average, 1 or 2 out of 100 will take your call or turn into business. So it's always a game of numbers. It's the same thing with dating. You always want to play the numbers, right? Which means you want to meet as many single women as you possibly can, because that's going to give you the highest percentage chance of finding one that is going to be marriage material. You know what I mean? That's not always the case. You may find her on the second date. You know what I mean? But the point is that you've got to put out the work. And as a man, these principles, it's like everything in life. If you want to make money, like, they're going to want you to put in the work. They're going to want you to put in hours. They're going to want you to do those things, Right.
And that's what I wanted to hear, because I've talked with some of the young men and they say, oh, well, you're telling me I need to work on myself. I need to focus on how I appear, and I need to make more money. These are worldly concerns. I want to live a spiritual life. And it's like, but you want to get married and have children. Don't you understand that the cross you have to carry as an Orthodox man is that you're going to need to be self-aware of how you present yourself in public. You're going to need to make money. You need to get a skill, whatever, and that's on your own. Figure out what your talents are, what your interests are, but you got to get a skill, and you have to be of service to society so you can get money in exchange.
Well, and I mean, I think it hits on something, which is it's more of a Protestant idea, this kind of spiritual secular divide.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're like, oh, the priest is spiritual because he's a priest, but I'm not spiritual because I'm a ditch digger. It's like, that's not orthodox.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's Protestantism. Well, technically, Protestants would say, well, that's not Protestantism, but trust me, that's Protestantism. There's a lot of that in Protestantism.
Right.
The reality is that, yeah, you need to read and understand what the saints say. I think it was Elder Cleopa who said, I know many people who get married who are unhappy in marriage. And he says, I know almost no one who became a monastic who's unhappy. Right? Now, you read Elder Thaddeus. What does Elder Thaddeus say? I've known lots and lots of monastics, and only one of them really had the grace of God. But I've met many married people, and they have the grace of God. Look, there's different, it's about acquiring the grace of God. That's what it is. Married or monastics about acquiring the grace of God, but they're not the same calling in terms of how that looks.
Right.
But there's a saying from the fathers that says a good married man will make a good monastic, and a good monastic would make a good married man.
Right.
Now, what are the hallmarks of that? Like when you read St. Paisios and others, there's a book on St. Pius. I wish I got to get you a copy of this. It's a pamphlet of his. You cannot find it anywhere, pretty much. And it's all about masculinity, basically.
Yeah, I definitely want that.
Yeah, I found it like 15 years ago. I've never seen it again. And I have I probably have like one of the only copies of it. But he basically says, this is funny because this is like late 80s and early 90s. He goes, the men who come and visit the church today or the monasteries on Mount Athos are worthless. That's what he said. Like the guys who come and visit are like worthless. He's like, they don't want to work hard.
Right.
So when somebody says, oh, Father, I want to be spiritual, I want to have a lot of kids and blah, 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 and they don't want to work hard, it's like, I don't know what delusional world you're living in, but being a married man is all about work. Right. That's what it's about. Your primary, listen, I'm not a big fan of money in general and having to deal with it. But the reality is like a ton of your life is going to be consumed with money. Right. It's not going to be your wife. I mean, it's going to be you. You're the one who's going to have to generate the money to sustain your family. And that requires hours and hours and hours of your time and energy every single day, sometimes 5, 6, 7 days a week. I don't know what else to say, but that's what it is. And
no, that was great advice because that divide between the secular and the spiritual, I hear it all the time. Yeah. Now I want to get your opinion on something we talked a little bit about privately, but this is right. Go ahead.
Wait. One thing though.
Go ahead.
Men, cut them scraggly beards. If your beard looks like trash, listen, if your beard looks like trash, get rid of it. You're not holy. You're not spiritual. That's not what looking like trash is not spiritual. If you're a monk living in the wilderness and you have no wife and whatever else, and you don't need to be attractive in any way, shape, or form, God bless you. But if you want a woman to find you attractive, stink and look attractive.
Right.
Carry yourself like you have a sense of purpose. Dress accordingly. You don't have to go all crazy, but like make sure that you look presentable in a way that a woman is going to find attractive.
Right.
You want your wife to be attractive. I mean, that's the irony. It's like you want a woman to like.
They always say that. Yeah, I just want a pretty virgin girl.
Yeah, they're like, I want to. Yeah, I don't want her to have any facial hair and all this other stuff. You're like, yeah, you want her to look a certain way and carry yourself a certain way. And so again, it's this idiocy of this again, the kind of like hyperdoxy of like trying to create an image of what a spiritual person looks like. And it's like, that's not what spirituality is. If you want to attract a woman, be attractive. It's important if you want to attract a woman to be attractive.
Right.
Like I mean, it should be common sense. Like, if you want to do whatever, and again, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but this kind of this thought process today of just like, I don't know, of like being kind of like unpresentable. Dudes' hair is all messed up. They're like not combing it. They're like, like their clothing is like whatever. Like, dudes not wearing cologne or even like deodorant or whatever,
Right.
and just it's like it's not attractive to women. It's
Right.
you gotta, like if you want to be in the game, you got to play by the rules. So.
Well, and that was a perfect actual bridge to where I wanted to go with the hyperdoxy, because I did a stream one time showing men how to tie ties, how to wear dress suits, how how to wear a pocket square, how to match colors. And I got this feedback from people telling me, "Oh my gosh, well, you're so worldly. All you could, you're so materialistic. This isn't what Orthodox people should be concerned with." And there's this growing phenomenon, especially as Orthodoxy is becoming more popular online, that when Father John Whiteford came on, he goes, "You don't have to be autistic to be Orthodox." That's like the first thing he said. And and God bless him, that there is a rising phenomenon of young men who may not have their life where they want it to be, as none of us do, but they come into the church and they know a lot about theology. They know a lot about church history. They know a lot about doctrine and dogmas. And they then almost become hyper-orthodox, where it's a detriment to their own spirituality and the judgment. You can never be as orthodox as they are, and the piety signaling, which is I would say it's the orthodox form of virtue signaling and what we see in secular culture.
Yeah.
I want you to speak a little bit to this, because everything you just said is practical fatherly advice to a young man on how to get a wife. And there's a growing phenomenon of the sort of social awkwardness. Oh, well, and part of it is the collapse of just traditional relationships between men and women in society. Some young men just may have never dated, or they get really, really nervous when they talk to a woman, but there's a social awkwardness that sort of almost plays itself out then as a hyper orthodoxy and policing everybody and trying to highlight that they're not as orthodox as they are. Have you seen this? And what are your thoughts on that?
Maybe I've run into it once or twice, but Patrick, can you do me a favor? Can I take a 2-minute break and you want to answer some chat?
Sure. Yeah.
I'll be right back. Okay.
Yeah. No problem. This is a great time to tell everybody, smash that like. Please smash that like. And also, if you guys have any questions, support the work by sending in a super chat. I'll address some that doesn't involve Father Moses. Well, it looks like we have only 3 $2 super chats came in on YouTube. It doesn't look like we have any on Streamlabs. Let me check Dono chat. Guys, if you have any questions for Father Moses, we got one on Heidi on Dono chat. I'm going to ask, I want to wait for Father, but if you have any questions, you want to get Father Moses' opinion on something, you want to, hear his perspective on something you're struggling with, send in those questions right now. We'll be able to answer all of those. And I hope you guys are enjoying this stream. I was really looking forward to it, because Father Moses, for those of you who don't know, he has an Instagram page of his weightlifting. And so he does powerlifting, and he is an animal. He is super strong. And so, here's one right here. So, the man is walks the walk and talks the talk. So if you guys have any questions about working out, about fasting, about life, feel free to send those in. Again, and you can follow, let me share the URL. So his handle on Instagram is McPherson Barbell. McPherson Barbell. Let me share this in the live chat here for everybody. So if you want to follow him on Instagram, it's at McPherson Barbell right there. You can just copy that at McPherson Barbell and put that in Instagram. You'll be able to follow him doing some of his weightlifting stuff. But yeah, he's got all types of stuff. So somebody, I already saw one of the super chats. They're asking, how does he feel about calisthenics? I imagine, given he's a power lifter, he's probably not going to have the greatest things to say about calisthenics, but I look forward to it.
Calisthenics.
Yeah, well,
like
Well, I mean, we can. I didn't want to break up the conference, but one of the super chats was, "How does Father feel about calisthenics?" And I was showing him your powerlifting page. I was like, "Well,
I
I'm
think the
pretty."
number one thing I tell everybody is just to be in shape. I
Yeah.
don't think that I think it just like it doesn't matter what you do as long as you do something to stay in shape. So I'm
Right.
like, find something that you like to do. Somebody's like, I like CrossFit. I'm like, I'm not going to do CrossFit. But if you like doing it and it
Yep.
helps you stay in shape, then I don't think that there's like a moral hierarchy of weightlifting,
Right.
right? You know what I mean? Like these are not moral issues. So there's no standard in terms of whatever godliness based on, you know what I mean? Now, if you're saying like, Father, I want to be as manly as possible, I'd be like, go do strongman. Strongman, I do strongman competitions. Dude, strongman competitions are the real deal. Like every time I go do a strongman competition, I'm like, it wrecks me so hard. Like I'll go do a powerlifting competition and like it's a Saturday. They're all competitions are on Saturday, right? But like by Monday, I'll do a light workout Monday. By Wednesday, I'll do a medium decent workout. And by Friday, I'm basically back to fresh again. You know what I mean? You do a strongman competition, bro, it will shut you down for like a week. It just decimates you. And I think personally, it's the most practical because you're always moving. There's cardio. There's awkward implements. You know what I mean? And they'll change events like the day of the competition and tell you to do other things. And so I mean, I think if you were to say what objectively is the manliest, I'd be like strong man 100%. Now, me personally, I like powerlifting better because I like tracking my numbers and I like trying to get a big total and all the stuff that kind of goes along with that. And I just love, I love deadlift. I love bench, you know, like I love those movements. I feel like having a big bench, like somebody said, if you had to choose a big bench or a big like log press, I'd be like, I want a big bench. Like,
Right.
but that's just me. That's just what I like. I don't think that that's objective or even matters. Right.
Right.
But like, you know, plus nobody's going to ask you like, what's your log press? You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right. Very true. And you know, I got a guy in our fitness. I do a fitness membership where it's an accountability group. It's all Orthodox guys, and we meet on the first
yeah,
Monday of every month. And we have to say what we're going to accomplish every month. And then the next meeting, we grade ourselves on lifestyle and work. So how we're making
yeah,
money, how successful we are there, diet, core strength and flexibility, and then strength and muscle building. And so we grade ourselves on all this stuff every single month. One of the guys has picked up archery, and this is something that
yeah,
he's been, and that's why I was pointing to the point you were making about calisthenics is he's into hiking, especially you know deer season, all this stuff, and
yeah.
he's been picking up archery. That's another great way to get out, get moving, you know, just do something physical.
Yeah, I think again, I'm a big fan of just being physical. Just being physical, having some muscularity, having some strength, having some capability. Like I do think every man should learn a bit about boxing, learn
Yep.
a little bit about jujitsu, even if all you know about jujitsu is the basics of like a rear naked choke and
Yep.
how to escape and or how to hold mount. Basic stuff just for the defense of yourself and for the defense really of your family.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just like I do think it's worthwhile for every man to know how to shoot a gun. If you choose like, hey, I don't want to own a gun or I don't want to do that, that's fine, but they're still valuable to do.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, and somebody mentioned in the comments they said what was it? They said something about Bill Kazmaier.
Oh
You
yeah, I
remember Bill
remember Bill
Kazmaier?
Kazmaier killing the strongman back in the day. Oh yeah, I used to watch those
Yeah.
on ESPN.
Dude, Bill Cosby, that is like the pinnacle of the male physique, dude. His traps were huge, huge arms, big chest, no abs, no abs. Like, I mean, he wasn't fat, but I mean, scary, just scary. And his intensity,
Yeah.
oh man, like Bill Kazmaier to me, like that's like one of the greatest physiques of all time. Like, I look at that and I'm like, that's what a man looks like, you know?
Hmm.
I love it. So, anyways, somebody else said in the text they said, oh, they said I bench press my wife. So
Yeah.
I was like, that's good. If you can at least bench press your wife, that's good. I guess if you're depending how big your wife is, I try to bench press my whole family. So if you add up all everybody's weight, that's the ideal right there, you know?
Yeah. That's something I need to work up to. Right now, it's just my fiance, so I can clearly bench press how much she weighs. But once the children start coming in, I'll keep that one in mind. Right before we took a break real quick. We were talking
Yeah,
about, and I want to get into the hyperdoxy of young
hyperdoxy.
men
Yeah.
entering the Orthodox Church and being, in a sense, overly zealous and using this and in some ways as a baton to beat people with, like on online. Maybe Twitter or X, I think, is one of the worst spheres of orthodoxy because
Yeah.
everybody is debating, constantly arguing and trying to defend orthodoxy. And I'm all about defending orthodoxy, but it just creates a sort of mentality that I think is negative. But what are your thoughts, or what's your
Yeah.
experience with the sort of hyperdoxy online Orthodox presence?
So a couple things. Like number one is when we understand the roots of Protestantism, the roots of Protestantism were basically a psychological reaction from Luther in his neuroticism to Roman Catholicism. And so Protestantism didn't answer or didn't present any unique theological questions or a unique theological outlook. Protestantism is essentially Catholicism with a different set of answers. It's a different side of the same coin. That's why all the questions are the same. The problem is that these guys coming to Orthodoxy are catechizing as Protestants. And so the problem is that they're looking at it and they're saying, what are all the theology, right, that Orthodox believe in? Which is like, number one is you're not equipped to understand Orthodox theology until you live an Orthodox life.
Right.
I remember when I was being catechized, as I was thinking about this podcast, when I would talk to the nuns that I knew that were like helping to catechize me, and I would ask them like heavy theological questions, they would say something along the lines of basically like, you have to be holy to really understand this stuff.
Right.
And so what happens is you have the spirit of scholasticism that everyone decries, right, in Catholicism. And then they use the same model here in Orthodoxy. And they use the same model of scholastic understanding, like people going, well, what's the essence and energy debate? It's like, first off, you do not know the difference between the essence and energy until you've seen the uncreated light. So if you've not seen the uncreated light, number one, the best you can do is parrot what the saints are saying. It's good to parrot them. It's better to talk about the saints than not talk about the saints, but you don't actually know or understand it. A perfect example of this, and I was going to pull out the quote from Saint Sophrony of Essex in his book, I Knew a Man in Christ by Metropolitan Hierotheos Vlachos. There's a point in the book where Metropolitan Hierotheos asks him about his writing. Now, think about Metropolitan Hierotheos. Very, very learned scholar, understands orthodoxy. And what is Saint Sophrony says? He says, what you write is good, it's very basic. I remember there's a popular blogger type person, and I remember asking my spiritual mother about them, and so they have a blog. There's lots of blogs. She said, well, they say things about prayer, but they don't really know them. Now, how many people reading the blog know that? Very few. Why? Because they don't know very much about prayer. So the more that someone writes flowery things and uses expressive language and does all kinds of different things, the more appealing and appetizing it is. And the more they want to be drawn to that and want to read about prayer and all these other things. It's like, that's not prayer. Prayer is hard work. And then there's layers or depths to prayer that you cannot get or even articulate or even really understand until you've been there. And 99% of us will never be there. So prayer is just hard work for us. And that's how we should view it. That should be the start, is understanding that prayer is something you commit yourself to. And then there's prayer where God shows up. It's a totally different type of prayer. And so when we're talking about Orthodox theology, you said something at the beginning, you said these people know a lot about Orthodox theology. And I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think the corrective is right, that they don't actually know anything about Orthodox theology, because Orthodox theology is deification, and they don't know anything about deification. They're not deified. That's why they're online and they're arguing with people and they're trying to prove their point, and they're arguing about all kinds of nonsense that has nothing to do with their life.
Right.
And I guarantee you, I hate to say it, but for a large percentage of these people, they will not be Orthodox in 5 years.
Well, and this is, again, great point, because you see this all the time online of somebody, oh, I'm Orthodox, and then they go on some crusade of constantly arguing with somebody, and you see it all the time. I don't typically engage with any of that stuff. And then 8 months later, like, well, I've been really thinking about it, and I'm converting back to the Catholic faith. Or and they come up with some ridiculous reason why they're no longer Orthodox. It's like, dude, were you even going to church? There's a guy that I did a stream with. I won't mention his name specifically, but he had this whole brand promoting orthodoxy. And then all of a sudden, one day, now he's a Muslim. And it turns out he was never even going to church. He wasn't even part of a parish. He wasn't even taking the Eucharist. And he had this huge Orthodox, YouTube channel brand. It's like, no wonder.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hate to say it, but that was one of the realities. I remember there was a parish with a lot of converts, and they were known for having a lot of converts. One of the things that also was known by people was that they had a lot of apostates too. So the reality is, if you're converting, I remember there's a great quote by what's his name? Metropolitan Ware.
Callistos Ware.
Callistos Ware, right? And I'm not a big fan, obviously, of his writing, whatever. But he had a great quote, and he said,
towards the end, I think he vocalized somewhat of a support for homosexuals.
Yeah, he had that. I don't really
know, but God rest his soul, and bless him. Don't wish
so
to.
The main thing is, he had a quote, and he said, when people convert to Orthodoxy, sometimes it sticks and sometimes it doesn't. But when people convert to Christ, then it sticks.
I love that.
And so, the reality is that there are people who are taking their Protestant framework and they are basically layering a thin veneer of orthodoxy and the church fathers and the saints over the top of it. And they're utilizing the theology that they know, which they don't really know,
right,
as a means of kind of weaponized apologetics. They need dads. They need spiritual fathers. They need spiritual fathers who would spank them.
Yeah.
In a good way, right? And you're not allowed, like, don't do this. Like, get off Twitter. Like, don't do this stuff. You're not at that level. You're not an authority. You don't understand the nuance of the church fathers. I did that quote earlier to show you exactly a perfect example of the church fathers. And I mean, modern saints that are still church fathers, because that succession never ends.
Right.
Of Elder Cleopa, who says, listen, almost everybody, right, who becomes monastic enjoys it. And then Elder Thaddeus, who says, listen, all the people that I know who have grace are lay people who are married. Right?
Right.
So listen, there's a lot of nuance in orthodoxy. And then especially when you get into anything to do with pastoral direction. Father Deacon Ananias was talking to me a bit about some of these arguments online about marital fasting and stuff. And listen, that's a hugely nuanced topic. Right. For a multitude of reasons. The number one reason being that the church gives medicine to the person.
Right.
Right. And the stronger the medicine, it has to be determined whether or not that person can take that medicine or not. Right. There's I can't remember who was one of the elders that always stuck with me. He says, if I give the same man the same medicine at two different times in his life, it will produce two completely different results. So if I have somebody who has cancer and I prescribe them chemotherapy, they will get very sick, but they may get well. But if they're healthy and I give them chemotherapy treatment, guess what happens? They just get worse. They don't get well. And so even the canons of the church, again, you come from a Western society where we have rule of law, we have mandatory minimums, we have all these different things. We see law as being very juridical. And when you read the canons of the canons of the church are prescribed in such a way that they are guidelines, and they have to be applied, and they have to be nuanced. You know, we have canons from I think it's from one of the early councils that says men cannot shave or modify their facial hair. Well, I don't think there's a single bishop today that would say, yeah, that's right, just grow, you know, like culture be darned, do whatever you want. You know what I mean? They would go, listen, the point at the time was to present masculinity in such a way that people weren't given over to, right? But today we have the application of that canon in the context of living in a secular society where we have jobs and expectations that have to be met as part of our Christian living. And so I think the best way that I can put it is what I see when I see this kind of ortho bro, you know, autistic theologian kind of culture is that it's really just Protestantism.
Yeah.
It's Protestantism of proof texting. Well, this saint said this. Well, this church father said this, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all divorced from pastoral care. It's divorced from context. You know, it's like you read a writing of a saint. Okay, you get two Greek villagers from the 20th century. Wow, balloons! This is amazing.
The heck?
I know, man. I apparently I have like all these secret symbols. Like I've got.
I've never seen that happen before.
Dude, I have like all the noetic knowledge of like triggering a response. But you get like, let's say this, you get two Greek villagers who are virgins, right?
Okay.
You get a man who's never masturbated. They marry, and then you tell them, hey, the elder says, hey, this is how the two of you should fast. Maybe they can keep to that. Maybe. We don't even know exactly how all of it was played out because we don't have people writing about their sex lives, right? And saying like, hey, we succeeded 50% of the time, or we succeeded 90%, right? We know what the instruction was from the saint for the application of those people in that context. You take our modern day where you have two people who not only grew up, both of which most likely were exposed to porn, but the man was heavily influenced by masturbation. Neither one of them were virgins when they even got married, let alone, you know, all these different things. And then, you know, you have to understand like, what are the goals and where am I trying to take them? And how do we take them there in a way that doesn't kill them? And I think that that's something that isn't talked about. People come to orthodoxy with a lot of zeal, and they go, oh, we're going to do all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. And then when the zeal kind of runs out, they end up resenting the faith.
Right.
And they
seen it multiple times.
They end up resenting the faith, and they say, oh, well, it's too much to bear. Or, you know, married couples. I mean, dude, I hear so many stories as a priest, but well, the elder told us to do X, Y, and Z, or, you know, to abstain, or this or that or the other. And it's like, that's not really, I'm sorry, that's not historical precedence, you know? And then you start to see the fruit sometimes, and you have to really take a step back and say, you know, maybe this isn't taking the people where they need to be taken spiritually. Right. And I think that that's ultimately, like, you know, when you get into some things that are more, how can we put it, more delicate, like marital fasting, right? Like marital fasting is a lot more delicate than eating vegan for 40 days.
Right.
And there are, you know, people online who are making statements that first off are not even married. And there we go again. And are able to, you know what I mean? And then they're quoting all these saints in the culture and context that has nothing to do with our culture and context.
Right.
And they don't hear confessions. They don't know any of the things that we as priests are actually hearing and dealing with. And, you know, I mean, so many priests I've talked to are like, what I think so many priests are gunning for is like, I want a parish where, you know, people are devoted to each other in their marriages, have healthy marriages, and the men are not given over to lust.
Right.
And, the way to get there is takes pastoral discernment and care, and you can't be putting things on people that are harder than they're able to do.
Right. Well, last question before we get into the super chats, and thank you so much for taking the time today, is if there were some men or women that may be watching this stream, heard what we've talked about and really liked it, and they want to become part of the Orthodox Church, what would be some advice to you? Especially coming from the the detritus of the sort of secular culture that we're all emerging from. What would your final advice be for them hearing this? That, oh, Father, I want to be a part of this.
I mean, number one thing I would say is find a ROCOR church. No, I'm serious. I mean, I don't want it to be. I mean, listen, every Orthodox church has the sacraments. I'm not arguing that. But I mean, the reality is I mean, first and foremost, go somewhere where you can get the best pastoral care, and try to find a priest who, you know, people often want kind of an Oprah priest. They want, you know, like, I just want to, you know, I just like, we just want to pat you on your back and say you're doing the best you can. And you know what I mean? It's just comfort. It's just like, it's just feel good. And they want a feel good kind of experience. In fact, there's something, I think it's in St. Nicodemus's book, where he says something like, harder priests are harder because they're more diligent and you'll get better growth out of them, or something like that. So I think oftentimes, like, people want kind of a feel good, friendly kind of, you know, therapist type of person. That's not really what a good priest is. You know, any relationship that you have with a priest is going to be nuanced based on the personality of the priest and their formation. But what you want to find in a priest is, you want to find a good father figure. And that means somebody who loves you enough that they're going to be strict with you, and they're going to have expectations of you.
Right.
And they're going to hold you to those. I mean, literally, it says it in the New Testament. It says, like, you know, didn't our fathers discipline us? We knew our fathers loved us because they disciplined us. And so God disciplines us. So number one is, and I'm saying this specifically for men, if you're looking for a spiritual father, look for a spiritual father that's going to give you some discipline and expect something of you. You know, I've talked to men before, and they'll come to me and they're like, you know, I'm really struggling with pornography. And I'm like, well, what does your spiritual father say? And they go, well, he doesn't really say anything. I go, what do you mean? Does he give you a penance? Tell you not to commune for a period of time? No, he doesn't do any of that. He just reads the prayer over me. I'm like, I'm sorry, but you need to find a new spiritual father. You need to find a spiritual father who's going to treat you like a dad, and he's going to take you under his wing and struggle alongside of you so that you can overcome this. The church is not here to enable sin. The church is here to conquer sin through the power of Jesus Christ. So if you're not conquering and experiencing that grace that is helping you move forward in your spiritual life, you need to find a good spiritual father that's going to do that. Now, my experience has been, I am from, obviously, ROCOR Church, and I notice in the ROCOR Church, listen, we tend to hold more strictly to the traditions of the faith, and the standards and the expectations that you're going to hear from the priest are going to, quite frankly, be higher than in other jurisdictions. So I would highly recommend a ROCOR church. Yep. I would highly recommend a lot of the Serbian churches. A lot of Serbian churches, now Serbians tend to have a little more of the ethnic component. It's a smaller jurisdiction, and there's reasons for that, but they're manly. I mean, nobody's met a 6'4" Serbian priest with stinking 10-inch hands that is like, oh, that guy's not manly. Like,
right.
every Serbian priest I meet is like, hello, father. And I'm like, like, hi, nice to meet you. Like, and they have, like, Serbians have a deep sense of manliness, a real deep sense of manliness. These are not feminized priests at all.
Right.
So, I mean, they're known,
God bless the Serbs.
yeah. I mean, listen, I mean, there's a reason they're not the priests, but they're known to be shooting guns off on Pascha, even here in America. So, like, that doesn't tell you what they're like. So, I mean, those would be the two. And then I would find good resources, like Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives by Elder Thaddeus, the book on St. Paisios. And I would focus a lot on myself.
Mm-hmm.
The church's whole idea is that you're going to put on blinders like a horse, and you're not going to look to your right and you're not going to look to your left. You're going to look at yourself. That's how you make spiritual progress. I don't make spiritual progress looking and seeing what other people are doing or not doing, or what they're doing wrong, or saying, hey, if I go to the gym and I try to get a workout in and all I did was focus on what everybody was doing wrong and how I needed to help them, I would never get any work done myself.
Right.
The point is, I've got to work first and foremost on myself, and I've got to work on my character and who I am, my prayer life before Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've got to spend my energy and time on. I can't be focused on what everyone else is doing. So, I mean, those would be the number one, kind of number two. And then, listen, if somebody says, well, there's no ROCOR, there's no Serbian, I would say, go around to the parishes, meet, sit down with the priest, get a sense of the priest's personality, know what questions you're asking. Is it traditional? Is it a traditional church? Am I going to get baptized? I've had numerous instances, maybe not numerous, but I've had several instances where someone says, I desire baptism from the depths of their soul. They're not even aware of a lot of the online discussion.
Right.
But from the depths of their soul, they go, I want to be baptized. They go to the priest. Priest says, basically, there's no chance we're baptizing you. And then they're like, what do I do? They end up at my church and they're like, Father, they're like, I asked them, what have you read? What do you do? It's not even from the internet. It's from the depths of their soul. They're like, I want to be baptized. I'm like, listen, we'll baptize you. Because if you're craving that baptism, then be with a bishop or be under a bishop that you can follow and agree with, because you're going to end up running into other problems and issues down the line. And so you need to be able to find a way to be obedient. Now, that doesn't mean that, listen, we're not inerrant. We're not infallible. It doesn't mean the bishop doesn't make any mistakes, but we are obedient, And so even like today, when I see people calling out things that happened during COVID or whatever else, and I'm like, listen, the church is not perfect and infallible. That's not what the church is in its iteration. It's a hierarchy, and we are obedient. And you know what? Sometimes our leaders, just like our earthly parents, and just like you, when you become a parent, make mistakes or do something that you wish you would have done different or think differently about afterwards or in hindsight. But people seem to have no grace. They have no grace for the stress and the pressure that the hierarchs were under. And they don't seem to have any sense of, like, I can't remember. It was like, I can't remember. It was another saint who said something like, it's hard to be obedient, but it's harder to be a leader. It's much, much more difficult. So what you have to do is get your attitude where you are not the new pope of the Orthodox Church and you dictate how everything should be done.
Right.
You know what I mean? I remember one time when I was newly Orthodox, and we became Orthodox at a Greek church that was very, very Greek, to say the least. Okay.
Okay.
And I remember there was something that I saw, and I don't want to get into the specifics because it will be too much details, but I remember I said to the priest, I said, hey, there was a thing there. I'll make it quick, which was, there was a woman who was pregnant outside of wedlock, and she was going up for Holy Communion. And I remember saying to him, hey, basically, like, what's the deal with that? what's going on, you know, or like it kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. And the priest was like almost in my face, and he was like, this has nothing to do with you. And I was like, and he's like, you need to worry about yourself and not worry about what other people are doing in the church. And I was like, okay. And I was like rebuked. Then later I heard the whole story and knew all the stuff that went in, and I was like, I was so wrong. I was so wrong. I was totally out of line. But in my Protestant egoism, I thought, well, you know, why are you doing this? You know what I mean? And I was
it's that
questioning
that legalism.
that
Yeah. Well, I
legalism.
thought
You know,
they were
why are
supposed to do
you
it
doing,
this way.
and you need to answer to me. Like, I'm a parishioner here. I was kind of like, hey, you need to kind of like, you know, answer to me. And he was like, I mean, what was rad was he was like, didn't give me any answer, didn't give me any details. He just rebuked me. And then later, when I heard all the details, I realized, like, wow, he really was right. And that's the thing. I think that we Americans of kind of like in a kind of democratic society, we're far more interested in thinking that we all have an equal vote, we all have an equal say in the church. We're all this, we're all that. Like, oh, I was baptized 6 months ago. I'll quote the church fathers to you and tell you what you should think about baptism or this or that or blah 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 blah. And I have opinions on everything. It's like, listen, the chrism hasn't even dried. Like, pump the brakes. Like, pump the brakes. Like, don't say anything. I mean, even the saints would say, don't even talk about the Jesus prayer until you've been doing the Jesus prayer for a minimum of 10 years. You know, that was old monastic wisdom, was like, you didn't even talk about it. So even today, when people have all these opinions and everything else, it's like, listen, you shouldn't even have, you should just be listening to your spiritual father, going to church, going to confession, working on your passions, getting all the dirt, grime, and unforgiveness and hidden sins and everything out of your soul. That should be your primary focus. Primary focus, not the state of the church or this bishop's doing this or that or blah, 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 blah. It's all distraction. None of that stuff is going to save you.
Right.
None of that stuff. It's not going to do anything for your soul. So,
well,
I mean,
and related to what you said, one of the most spiritually beneficial things that happened to me was early in my Orthodox journey. I'm Orthodox, and then COVID happens, and I'm in the Antiochian church, and unfortunately, my priest was very aware of what was going on and was not buying into the propaganda. But the parish, and like I said, my priest is going to be 91. He's old. He's tired, and so unfortunately, many of the parish are of the more liberal minded, and they were really pushing the issue, really pushing. And he was like, "No, everybody's fine. You know, we're gonna try to get back to normal." This was once we were allowed to go to church, and then Metropolitan Joseph at the time made a ruling, social distancing, and then all this stuff. Well, I was so mad. I was like, "Oh, I'm going to go to a different parish," because I was refusing to wear the mask and everything. I'm going to go to a different parish, and I'm going to, find true believers, because this parish, wasn't angry with my priest. I was angry with the congregation and how they were put so much pressure on Father to capitulate. And for like 6 or 8 months, I stood in an adjacent room, and thank God my spiritual father, Subdeacon Mark, we had a private conversation, and he made it clear to me that the Orthodox response isn't just to go leave and go to another parish because I was upset, even though maybe I was justified in the way I felt, but it was to submit. And I stood in a different room for like 8 months and watched liturgy on a TV screen. But the fact that I did that changed the way that the congregation felt about me, because they saw that I didn't miss a Sunday. Yeah, I wasn't going to put a mask on, and I wasn't going to do the stuff that they wanted to be done, but I didn't miss a Sunday. And they saw the commitment in that. So it's funny how God's providence, you can't understand it, and how the mystery works inside the church. Something that I was so angry about, and I'm going to go do my own, I'm out of here, and then it's like, no, just show your faith by doing exactly what they're going to allow you to do. Okay, well, they'll allow me to be in a different room. I'll stand there. And I stood, and that's actually been a huge, now the congregation, my relationships with everybody, the way they feel about me, the sincerity that they see in my heart and in the faith, totally different.
Well, and I think the thing is like ultimately you chose a path of humility, which was also humiliation, right?
Yeah.
Anytime we're willing to go there, which is brutal to go there, God will take care of us and work out the details. Because that's where the grace is found. The grace is found in being humble, you know? And so when we're fighting against the priests, the bishops, all these different people, we're waging this war. We're telling people that if you get vaccinated, like I didn't get vaccinated, not interested in vaccines in general, whatever, right? But when you get into the point where you're telling people, well, if people take the vaccine, it's a pre-mark of the beast and all this, bro, you're like, I'm sorry. Like, I cannot get on board with that. You know, I can't. People have to have the nobility of choice to make good and bad decisions. And the reality is that we're all responsible for our own decisions. And it's not for me to judge. It's not for me to get into everybody else's, situation and figure out what they're doing right and doing wrong. The reality is I'm going to die and I'm going to answer for a lot of stuff that I do wrong. And that's going to be very brutal. I'm obviously not looking forward to that.
Right.
And so I'm not going to die and answer for what anybody else is not doing. You know what I mean? It's not going to be part of the judgment.
Right. Well, Father, thank you so much. We got a few questions that we have.
Yeah.
So let's see. The first one over on Dono Chat, Heidi sends in $5 and says, is it bad to work out to music when that music stays in my head and distracts me from the Jesus prayer? Must I work out in silence? It's hard for me to get really fired up without music, but is it parasitical in a sense?
Dude, that's a great question. I mean, again, the Father's always, champion prayer above everything else. So one thing I would say is, I would try to find music that doesn't get stuck in your head. 100%. I would. Like, I listen to music. The only time I listen to music really is when I'm working out. But I notice that if I listen to something too much or the same song too often, it will start to get stuck in my head. And I don't want it there. I mean, I actually went through like a detox of music for a long time. And it cleared out a lot of it out of my mind and out of my thoughts. So I would say if anything inhibits or interferes with prayer, it's best to avoid it and to find a substitute. Like, again, can you find something that's more instrumental? Can you find something that is less repetitive? A lot of pop music is jingly repetitive because it's trying to get stuck in your head.
Right.
Now, if you listen to Unearth, it's probably not going to get stuck in your head. All you're going to hear is that double bass hitting real hard. You'll be fired up. You won't even understand the lyrics. Trust me. Like, you can't even make out what the guy is even saying. So it's like perfect,
Thanks for that. Young old boy threw in $2 Canadian and says, Father Moses, please come back soon. This is so edifying. Thank you, that young old boy again. And then we had Bedward Ernez asking you about calisthenics, which you already answered. And then Ghostios throws in $2, says, David is so right. The church is a hospital. Absolutely. And then 1 foot out the door throws in $5 Canadian. We got a few Canadians today. How do we turn the other cheek to the the pedos and train wrecks going after kids right now?
Well, I mean, again, when people talk about how they're going to wage war against, they're not going to do anything, right? Like, there's no way to really battle these people aside from, voting against the things that they are voting to institute in our society. The number one way to overcome a society is to breed a society within that society.
Right.
Right. So, like, if you have one kid, the reality is that you're not going to be very transformative in the society. If you have 5 kids and every Orthodox family starts having big families, there's a reason in London that the mayor of London's name is what is it? Isn't it Muhammad now? What is it?
It's Khan, isn't it? It's Sadiq Khan is the mayor.
Yeah, Sadiq Khan. Yeah. What's the that was it was like what was the number one name
Muhammad.
Yeah, it was like number one birth name in London was like Muhammad or something.
Well,
So it's like
it was like within a 30-year period, it went from it was like 86% native British, or let's just use the vernacular
yeah,
white, to now it was 36%. I think in 2022,
yeah, it's
36% of
so,
London is actually British, native
yeah.
British.
So the reality is like you have to create something within the society that's outside of the society.
Right.
And that's that's part of what having a family and converting your children. The hardest people to convert are going to be your own kids.
Right.
Yeah, because they're going to see you with your faults, your strengths, weaknesses, whatever. But handing on the faith historically is always the most challenging. Like that saying, if you run, they will walk. If you walk, they will sit. If you sit, they will lie down. Right? I mean, a lot of Christianity, Western Protestant Christianity in the 50s to 80s was sitting. It didn't have any cross. It was a crossless ethos. You had two kids, right? Birth control became the thing. Services, tithing, all these things, regular church attendance went out the window. Modesty in church went out the window, right? Like if you just look at that in terms of the church is the culture is a reflection of what's happening within you could say the Christian or spiritual realm of the country. So even though America wasn't orthodox, okay, there were times where Christianity was very ascetical here in America. Catholics fasted, they had large families, they handed on the faith, they went to church diligently, right?
Right.
And that was reflected in the society. So now I would say, listen, the best way to change the society is to breed, have a Christian family.
No, I totally agree with you. What would be your response? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's it.
I was going to say, what would be your response to, again, this is much more popular with, or I guess not popular, but frustrating for the younger people is the first thing you mentioned is voting. That is, it seems as if we'll never have a true election. Again, maybe not. I'm prejudging or something, but just based on what we've seen in the last few years, the faith in our democratic system has certainly waned amongst those who have been paying attention. And so, like you said, what would you, again, I think I know what your answer is. You still have to be faithful, find a wife, and have a big family. But to a young man who's feeling anxious about, 2024 is right around the corner, I suspect something's going to happen before that is able to come to fruition. What would be your advice to somebody struggling with the anxiety that there is no agency in the U.S. anymore?
Yeah, it's a long trajectory, but if you look, I mean, we basically converted the Roman Empire into the Byzantine Empire, right? So we literally took a pedophilic, homosexual, pagan culture, society, empire, the biggest one the world had ever seen, and made it Christian. And it's like, well, how did we do that? It's like we had children.
Right.
We had children and we practiced the faith. And the grace of God was with the people. And it overcame what you would assume was way more insurmountable than, what we're facing today. I mean, literally, Christians were having babies and families in the face of the threat of having their children taken away and martyred. And they continued to have families.
And then that goes right in the face of what some of the people are saying. Oh, well, they're aware of everything we're hinting at in regards to society. This isn't a time to raise children. I don't know if I can raise a child right now. It's just there's no hope. But like you said, well, what are you talking about? Like history teaches us that that should not be a factor in regards to whether you're going to live piously and build a family or not.
Correct. Yeah, it is 100% the case, and I want to say it's in the writings of Saint Paisios, maybe on that family life book. I can't remember. Sorry, I've read quite a bit, but I've read stuff, and so sometimes I have quotes. I can't remember where I get them from, but he basically says Yeah. What did Christian people say now? What do we do with how secular the world is becoming? And he's like, well, you have kids. And if they bring up an objection, he said, well, what did early Christians do in the face of persecution and martyrdom? They continued to have families. So that's always been the answer. We change the society by the conversion and the life of our children. And when that happens, the culture ends up following that stream. But listen, hard times, are fertile ground. Yeah, there's fertile ground, man. The hard times are the fertile ground. When everything's going good, that's the hardest time to have people join the church. Right now, as all these Western churches are becoming pro-homo and everything else, the reality is like people don't know what to do or where to go. Now the church is an option. 20, 30 years ago, a conservative Protestant church was a conservative Protestant church. Now it's like conservative-ish, but given a change in leadership and demographic and whatever else, just could easily end up being a liberal church. You know what I mean? And I say that lowercase c. Obviously, it's not the church, but you know what I mean.
Right. I got your point. Yeah. And looks like the last super chat we have comes from Nathaniel, throws in $20 and says, thoughts on competitive fighting. I've been doing Muay Thai for years. I've been told not to hurt anyone by my father, but it is the hurt game. I don't feel the need to hurt, just want to dance for real.
I mean, who is arguably the greatest heavyweight MMA fighter of all time? Fedor Emelianenko, who's a devout Orthodox Christian. I mean, like devout, like his priest was walking him to the cage. I think the difference is, I've noticed, because I've been watching MMA for
I love UFC and all that stuff.
Yeah, I started watching it when it originally came out, like 30 years ago, pretty much.
Oh wow!
Like, I was like, yeah. I was like 12 or 13. You could get
when
the
Gracie was in one of the gis.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was old Tank Abbott, all those guys. Don Fry, another absolutely fantastic male physique, dude. That mustache and just jacked. Anyways, so the thing is that when you actually look at the way that Russians, or I think honestly, even when you look at like the Dagestanis and whatnot, the way that they look at it, it's not personal.
Right.
And Americans, and I don't know if it's because of wrestling or what, make everything personal and theatrical and trash talking and insults and all this other stuff, so that the fight becomes like an act of violence. Whereas if you look at the way that Fedor was, they actually talk about it more of that it was a challenge to see who was the better competitor,
right?
Who had the better training, who had the better martial arts. It was in the spirit of martial arts. So in that spirit, the goal wasn't to inflict pain, which is like, hey, I hate you, I'm mad at you, I'm going to fight you, I want to hurt you. It was in the spirit of martial arts, which was, if we don't battle, we don't know which martial arts is the best.
Right.
And so you can see that even with, again, I think Khabib and some of the other ones, which is like, they just didn't talk trash.
Right.
And they were always like, why are you talking trash? Or why are you talking about my family? Or why are you doing this? Because you look at them wrestling and they wrestle each other like crazy. But it's like, why? It's a competitive male atmosphere of who's the best at competition.
Right.
I think, again, if somebody goes into it with the desire to hurt or injure other people, that's sociopathic behavior. It's unhealthy and unnatural. And if I had somebody who was under my spiritual care that was like that, I would certainly push them away from engaging in it. But certainly with Muay Thai and whatnot, I mean, I know guys that they just love it. And it's not about hurting the other person. It's seeing who's best. The same thing with jiu-jitsu, right. And can you get hurt doing jiu-jitsu even if you don't mean to? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. You get jacked up.
Everybody's rolled knows that.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not on purpose. And I used to box. I mean, I boxed when I was in high school. And there was a lot of boxing. Again, there's no animosity. It's not about hurting the other person. It's about testing your skill against their skill. So I do think that there's a martial arts component. A lot of what I see today in the UFC with the trash talk and the animosity and the insults, I find that very distasteful.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not part of the martial arts culture anymore.
Right. It's not.
It's more of the theatrics and the kind of wrestler culture.
Yep.
I just think stuff is so lame, you know? So anyways,
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Great point. Well, Father, that's going to do it. I did not plan on keeping you for 2 hours and 44 minutes, but thank you very, very much for giving me that time. I truly appreciate it. And I can tell just by some of the responses in the live chat, this has been very educational and insightful for a lot of the people watching. So thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to say to everybody before we get off? I think we got about 130 people right now.
No, next time we do it, though, it's got to be in my garage gym.
All right, I'm down.
We gotta be lifting, dude. I want to see some sweat, man.
All right.
Some suffering, you know what I mean? Some puking in the front yard. If your neighbors don't see you puking in your front yard from working out, you're not being a good neighbor. Let me tell you. All right. So for sure, man, you got to come get a workout in, or we'll go do a competition or something. Go do a strongman competition for a day. That'd be a blast.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well,
yeah, I always
you.
say, I'm like, hey, I may not have the most pious congregation, but I think I have the strongest congregation. I think I have the most deadlifters that can lift over 400. So if you're out there and you see the stream,
that's legit.
You want a piece, come and get it. We're in Texas.
That's awesome. Well, Father, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks for everything you're doing. For everybody watching, I will be back Monday. And we'll be talking a little bit about the decline of mental institutes and looking at mental health in America. So we'll be discussing a little bit about that and trying to bring a sort of theological perspective. So I will see you all Monday. And as always, until next time, God bless.